And now, Florida welcomes CPAC, open for business. Please welcome the Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, and the Chairman of the American Conservative Union, Matt Schlapp.
It does a heart good, doesn't it, Governor?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, welcome to Florida. I know you probably wouldn't have been able to even do this in a lockdown state. I'm just glad I could attend CPAC, because if you did do it in a lockdown state, I have a policy, I only travel to free states. So I don't have any problem being in Florida.
We, as you all know, because many of you made the trip, we often have CPAC in another state, to be not named. That state decided to cancel us because they said this was unsafe. And I said to myself, I'll be damned if I'll be the first ACU chairman in 50 years to not have CPAC. And we looked around the country, Governor, and you have some competition. Tennessee, Texas, Georgia. We kind of moved away from Georgia, no offense. I'm sorry, Marcy. And we decided we'd come to Florida, and thank you for welcoming us with open arms.
Absolutely. 100%.
You know, Governor, some of your colleagues get Emmys for acting. We're happy to be in a state that has a governor who deserves the People's Choice Award.
Yeah, thanks.
I now give you Governor Ron DeSantis.
All right. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Well, thank you. We love you too. For those of you who aren't from Florida, welcome to our oasis of freedom. We are an oasis of freedom in a nation that's suffering in many parts of the country under the yoke of oppressive lockdowns. We look around in other parts of our country, and in far too many places, we see schools closed, businesses shuttered, and lives destroyed. And while so many governors over the last year had kept locking people down, Florida lifted people up. Florida is leading in protecting our vulnerable residents, saving the economy, and safeguarding the freedom of our people. In Florida, schools are open. Every Floridian has a right to earn a living, and all businesses have a right to operate. Now, we are stronger as a state and much happier as a people because of this leadership. Florida has lower per capita COVID mortality than the national average and lower than 27 other states. Our unemployment rate is lower than the national average, even though tourism isn't fully back. And our budget is in great shape. We have not touched one red cent from our rainy day fund throughout this whole time. Florida got it right, and the lockdown states got it wrong. Florida has also led and continues to lead on ensuring the integrity of our elections. Now, 20 years ago, if you had uttered the word Florida and the word elections in the same sentence, you would have been met with snickers. Well, when I came into office, I didn't wait for a crisis. I took early action to make sure we'd have a smooth election. One of the first things I did when I took office in 2019 was accept the resignation of Brenda Snipes as the supervisor of election in Broward County. and remove the supervisor of election in Palm Beach County. We got those going in a good direction, and then when COVID hit, I rejected pressure to make hasty and ill-conceived changes to our election administration like mass mailing of unsolicited ballots. And the result? On election night, by midnight, the state of Florida had counted, tabulated, and put out 11 million votes. But we're not resting on our laurels. This year, Florida is leading on banning all forms of ballot harvesting and banning third-party political groups like those funded by billionaire Mark Zuckerberg from interfering in the administration of our elections. Bottom line is this: in Florida, your vote counts, and we will continue to have a process that is transparent and that inspires confidence. Florida is also leading in protecting our people from political censorship and in holding big tech accountable. When our legislature convenes next month, it will pass and I will sign the most ambitious reforms yet proposed for combating political censorship and deplatforming, for preventing big tech from interfering in our elections, and for safeguarding the privacy of your personal data. In Florida, we are not going to let the terms of the debate in our country be set by oligarchs in Silicon Valley. Now, Florida is leading on the issues that matter to conservatives. We don't spout hollow rhetoric. We take decisive action. And what's true in Florida is true for conservatives across the nation. We cannot, we will not go back to the days of the failed Republican establishment of yesteryear. We reject open borders and instead support American sovereignty and the American worker. Building a movement on the foundation of amnesty and cheap foreign labor is like building a house on a field of quicksand. We reject weakness in the face of the threat posed by China, including their actions in international trade. We reject military adventurism. Instead, support a strong defense solely for the purpose of protecting our nation and its people. Now, the battles ahead will be made more difficult without the voice of one of our greatest field generals, my friend Rush Limbaugh. On Wednesday, the state of Florida had the flags flown at half-staff in honor of Rush, in honor of his legacy. Rush displayed the courage of his convictions time and time again. Rush was one of the first to fight and win against cancel culture. Rush showed that fighting the left requires strength and that conservatism devoid of backbone is doomed to fail. So at this moment in our history, and I think Rush showed us this, but particularly now, standing for the right things comes at a cost. You will be attacked, you will be smeared, and you may even be canceled by the major organs of the political left. Now, anyone can spout conservative rhetoric. We can sit around and have academic debates about conservative policy, and I'm not saying you don't do any of that, but the question is, when the Klieg lights get hot, when the left comes after you, will you stay strong or will you fold? So enjoy CPAC in Florida as you leave to go back home, although if you're not from here, I don't know why you'd want to leave here. But when you do and you engage in the battles ahead, hold the line. stand your ground and don't ever, ever back down. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Don't you agree we need voter ID and clean election rolls? Well, your Judicial Watch is in federal court right now fighting to make sure your elections will be fair and honest. Politicians don't want you to know what they're up to. Secret slush funds, secret emails, and pay to play. Judicial Watch is your watchdog in Washington, D.C., shining the light of transparency on our nation's capital.
Want to catch the latest news on government corruption, waste, fraud, and abuse?
Remember there was an impeachment? Do you remember that?
Then check out Judicial Watch's weekly update with Tom Fitton.
We're fighting Adam Schiff, trying to get records about his misconduct.
Subscribe now to Judicial Watch on social media to catch Tom Fitton's weekly update.
Forgotten Hillary Clinton. Judicial Watch exposed the Clinton email scandal, and we're in court right now holding her accountable to the same laws and rules the rest of us are expected to follow.
You've seen the radical left pushing their agenda in Washington. Socialism, amnesty, censorship. But in the states, quietly, these radicals are pushing a power play that would give them more power. Forever. The left's National Popular Vote campaign would let liberal cities on the coasts pick the president every single time. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact would shred the Constitution. The leader of the group bragged to the New York Times that it's a way to get around the founders' design. And what about election integrity? A national vote could require a national recount. But the left's National Popular Vote plan doesn't allow it. But it does set the stage for a complete federal takeover of elections. Goodbye local control. To win now, it takes a broad coalition across the country. But National Popular Vote would open the door to regional parties and spoiler candidates, making it easier for socialists to win. Defend the Constitution. Stop socialism. Stop National Popular Vote.
Ladies and gentlemen, why the left hates the Bill of Rights and we love it. Please welcome Utah Senator Mike Lee.
Good morning. Hello, CPAC. I couldn't be more excited or more honored to be with you today. And I can't think of a better way of celebrating freedom than to get together to talk about our founding fathers and to talk about the Bill of Rights to kick off this discussion. I want to tell you a little bit about the fact that the left, of course, does hate the Bill of Rights. Why? Well, because the Bill of Rights talks about things that the government can't do. And that, to them, is like blasphemy. That's the absolute worst, because they want to use government. Let's talk a little bit about why the Bill of Rights was written and why it exists, why it matters still today, especially now. Now, I don't have to tell you that we're, of course, facing a lot of problems as a country. We've got more problems than a math book right now, and most of those problems, a disproportionate share of them, come from government, and they're in need of solutions. We have division, we've got rancor, we've got a clamor of loud voices crying out in opposite directions all across the country. Those are the doomsayers who are predicting more gloom. Those are the skeptics, doubting whether we can ever build a better future together. Those of the idealists, claiming that we need to use government to build some kind of leftist utopia, and those who are calling out for unity. And if there's one thing that all of them, and in fact all of us, can unite around, it should be this: skepticism. Skepticism in government and faith in the people. You see, those two things work against each other: skepticism in government and faith in the people. If the skeptics need more skepticism, be skeptical of government. If the doubters need more doubt, be skeptical of government. If the hopeful need more hope, be skeptical of government. And if those who call for unity, you really need something around which to unite, be skeptical of government. Because faith in government, and let's remember what government is. Government's not some holy thing. It's not some noble aspiration. It's nothing more and nothing less than the official collective use of force. It's just coercive force. And so faith in government means tyranny. You can't have faith in government without promoting tyranny. And faith in people means freedom. That, you see, is the absolute key to our founding and to our Bill of Rights. And it also happens to be precisely what the left is trying to undo. I also don't need to tell you that our fundamental freedoms are coming under attack more and more each and every day. In fact, in many ways, their sole agenda is putting more faith in government. And as a result, they take steps, inevitably, to make us less free. Anything that puts faith in government is wrong and lends toward tyranny. So how do they do this? Well, they do it by eroding the very same protections in the Bill of Rights that make us free. Now, there are, of course, two main ways in which the Constitution protects our freedom. First, you've got the structural protections, the checks and balances, the manner in which power is split up. It's split up between state and local power on the one hand and between the three branches of the federal government on the other hand. Those are very, very important. But there's another set of protections that are substantive in nature, that amount basically to the thou shalt nots of the Constitution. In other words, the Constitution, as adopted in 1787 and ratified a couple of years later, had these structural protections, but it lacked something else. It lacked something that Richard Henry Lee, who was a founding father, described as those essential rights of mankind without which liberty cannot exist. Richard Henry Lee was worried that the original Constitution didn't have specific protections for those freedoms. And so within a couple of years, Congress got to work and we got the Bill of Rights. Almost immediately after they ratified the Constitution, they added this series of 10 amendments, the first 10, a separate list of thou shalt nots to the government, things that the government simply cannot do, with the express purpose of safeguarding liberty. You see, the Founding Fathers knew from sad, difficult, tragic experience under British tyranny that bad things happen when we allow too much power to accumulate in the hands of the few and in the hands of people who are not skeptical of government and in fact put their trust in it. You see, this is part of how British tyranny became so bad in the first place. People put an almost religious amount of zeal and support and, yes, faith in the crown and therefore in government. That's not where it belongs. We know better as conservatives. So when human beings, any human beings, wield that much power with no controls around it, that inevitably leads to tears and worse. People do bad things with that power. They restrict people's speech. They restrict their ability to preach and live according to their religious beliefs and to petition the government seeking relief from the very abusive action taken by that very government. They disarm the populace. They unreasonably search and seize individuals at their homes, invading their personal privacy and seizing their personal effects without a warrant. This has happened in societies over and over and over again. And the one common ingredient, people put faith in the government and don't trust the people. And so, as a society, as a people, as a country, we made a choice with the Bill of Rights, a choice to prevent that kind of tyranny and to protect the freedoms we hold most dear, as only we the people can. You see, the Founding Fathers understood that ultimately the bulwark of individual liberty must lie with the people themselves. It's not in government, it's in us. But that, you see, is why the Bill of Rights exists. And it's why government worshipers everywhere hate it. They despise it because we're telling them, you can't do that. It's worth noting that the protections in the Bill of Rights are listed independently, separately, because each enumerated right is significant and should stand independent on its own, and it should always be honored. But we also can't overlook the fact that each of these protections also can work in concert together to protect liberty. And I believe that there's one freedom in the First Amendment that's central to all the others and is particularly worth highlighting today. It's long been said, as I'm sure you'll hear today, that whether by accident or by divine design, our first freedoms are found in the First Amendment. Our freedoms of speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. And perhaps the one that's least known, least appreciated, least celebrated, but from which all others draw their strength and ultimately depend in one way or another, is our right to assemble, to do what we're doing right here today. Freedom of religion depends on it. Core political speech is downstream from it. The right to petition government is bound to it. And the freedom of the press presupposes it. We can't do any of these things without the freedom to assemble. And it's one of the main freedoms, not coincidentally, that's been severely restricted with the growth of government that's occurred during this global pandemic. We've been prevented from gathering in our churches, in our schools, and in our workplaces. In some cases, even from gathering in protest while seeking redress of our grievances. Whether knowingly or not, those in power have struck at the core piece that has the ability to cause the whole structure to collapse. And we're suffering the consequences. Just look at California. Sad, sad California. The people of California are recalling their governor because they've had enough of these stringent closures. They've had enough of the encroachment upon their rights and enough of the government telling them that they can enjoy a 5-star meal at French Laundry with their governor, but they can't go to church. Of course, you can enjoy that meal there only if you can afford the $10,000 a plate entry price, but that's another issue. On the flip side, I'm so grateful to my friend Governor Ron DeSantis for keeping Florida open. Government, of course, is itself able to assemble pretty darn well. You know, miraculously, in the midst of the pandemic and otherwise, in places like Washington and state capitals and city halls, government officials allow themselves to assemble. They don't restrict themselves, this can seem intimidating to us as everyday citizens. Who are we might think, compared to those with massive consolidated power, who, as we might see it, have all the say? But the beauty of our country, of our history, and of the design of our system of government, that's the power of ordinary citizens standing together. When one person realizes that he's not alone in his beliefs and finds another, and then another, and then a few more. That's how we end up with gatherings like this one, where the magic happens. And thank you, Matt Schlapp, for making this gathering happen. The nation and the world have been changed by groups of clear-minded, purposefully law-abiding Americans assembling together. It's how our country was born, and it's how we've fought successfully to maintain our liberty thus far. And it's why we're here today. We're here today not because we have faith in government. We're here because we have faith in the American people. Those two work in opposite directions. It's only when we've got faith in the American people that things work. Our founders understood that at the end of the day, some of the most dangerous threats to freedom come from government itself. Because government is force, and in that respect, it's the opposite of freedom. They understood that government is ultimately the authorized collective use of coercive force, force that can be used against us, and so for that very reason, they sought to constrain it. They understood that in government there is a choice between liberty and tyranny, and there is this choice that is constant and relentless and binary. Tyranny, liberty. We got to choose which one. Pick a horse and ride it. We're here because we, as a group, choose liberty. We're here because we believe, we understand that government works for us and not the other way around. We're here because we trust the people and are skeptical of government. That, my friends, is worth uniting around. I believe that if we understand these principles and we continue to talk about them, we can unite around them. We can, we must, and together, assembled, we will. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next session is a set of curated speeches. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. Please welcome American Conservative Union Executive Director, Dan Schneider.
I'm going to be really brief because I've got my board chairman here, Matt Schlapp, sitting here, and he's probably anxious to hear Governor Scott Walker come out and talk about freedom of speech, and I'm sure you are too. But we are covering all 10 amendments to the Constitution, the first time, the Bill of Rights, because the left has decided they do not like us having these inherent rights. They think the government gives rights. Who gives us rights? That's right. Our Creator has given us our rights. They are naturally ours. Government does not exist to take away rights. Government exists to protect our rights. So you're going to hear from 5 amazing individuals about each of the 5 parts of the First Amendment. So without further ado, the great former governor of Wisconsin and now the new president of the YAF, Young America's Foundation, Governor Scott Walker.
Hey, man. Good morning, YAF. Good morning, CPAC. It is great to be with you, but I got to tell you, America is under siege. We see it on our campuses. We see it in our culture, and increasingly we see it in our communications with the censorship from big tech. Left-wing professors, liberal activists, mass media, even some of our major corporations are attempting to cancel conservative thought. They don't want to compete with us in the battle of ideas because they know they'd lose. They just want to cancel us. I know what that's like. A decade ago, the Occupy movement didn't start on Wall Street. It actually started in my street in Madison, Wisconsin. The big government special interest wanted to intimidate us, but they didn't. In many ways, it's kind of like the car I saw driving around the People's Republic of Madison back at the time, where the bumper on the back of the car had two stickers. One of them said coexist. You know those stickers with all the religious symbols? It said coexist, but get this. Right next to it, it said recall Scott Walker. You just can't make this stuff up. You just can't make this stuff up. In many ways, it's like the current calls from liberals for unity. They only mean it if you agree with them. If not, they want to intimidate you or recall you or cancel you. We have to fight back. In particular, we have to fight back when it comes to the defense of free speech. As was just mentioned, the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution clearly states in this case that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. But despite this constitutional guarantee, freedom of speech is most at risk on our college campuses. Think about that for a minute. The very place where it should be the most revered is where it's most at risk. Sadly, there are plenty of examples of college administrators and student government officials who are infringing on the free speech of conservative students. That's why I'm so excited, as Dan mentioned, to be the new president of Young America's Foundation. Thanks. And YAF is at the forefront of fighting to protect the free speech rights of conservative students across the country. Not just YAF students, but every conservative student on campus. And here's just a couple of examples of the things we're working on that you can read about at yaf.org/free speech. Twice in the spring and again in the fall of 2017, University of California, Berkeley administrators discriminated against conservative students and YAF and our speakers just purely based on our viewpoint. In each of these cases, UC Berkeley administrators actually applied what they have, which is an unwritten and I would say unconstitutional rule that's called the high-profile speaker policy that they use to block conservative speakers from giving lectures on campus. The school used this to propose, or impose, I should say, a 3 p.m. curfew. Think about that. A 3 o'clock in the afternoon curfew for speakers. They banned all marketing, and they imposed these major security fees to try and stop us from having them. Then, when we sponsored another speaker on campus, UC Berkeley administrators actually charged fees that were 3 times larger for security than they charged left-leaning students who brought a Supreme Court justice on campus in the exact same auditorium. You're not supporting free speech if you don't apply the rules universally to all students, regardless of their ideological beliefs. To restore the First Amendment rights of these students, we stood up and filed a federal lawsuit against UC Berkeley and its administrators. And we won. We won. Yeah, they settled the case and they paid the legal fees, but most importantly, they got rid of that unconstitutional policy and they stopped those exorbitant fees for conservatives on campus. But we see it elsewhere. In a similar case, YAF defended students' rights at yet another California campus, California State University in Los Angeles, after the school administrators there tried to censor a YAF-sponsored lecture that brought in Ben Shapiro. So they said you couldn't do this. 3 days before, the president got up and said, you know, this is not good. We're going to cancel this event. And the students said, we're still going to have it. So administrators and faculty literally formed a human chain to try and block the students from going in to hear the lecture. We sued. with the help of Alliance Defending Freedom, we filed a First Amendment lawsuit against the university officials, not just the university. And wouldn't you know it, we included the president. They settled, they got rid of that policy, and again, we won on behalf of conservative students and free speech. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, there are plenty of other cases. You can go to yaf.org/free speech and read all about them, many still pending today. But unless we take action, this is going to continue into the future. Now, the good news might say, well, there's a recent poll that YAF did that found that 93% of college students say they're for free speech. That sounds great until you dig a little deeper and find out that half of all the liberal students say it's okay to infringe upon the free speech rights of other students because they offend others. Apparently, they offend anybody except for conservatives. Let's be clear, young people did not learn this on their own. Years of left-wing professors and increasingly large numbers of radical activists on campus have shaped a new generation of snowflakes. That wee garbage has seeped into our culture, and sadly, many corporations have now bought into this woke mindset. Having said all that, I'm still an optimist. America continues to be that shining city on the hill that attracts people from all over the world because of our freedom and our opportunities available to every citizen. Free people must be able to speak out and challenge ideas. The Constitution guarantees that right. But remember, freedom is fragile. As President Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It's not something we pass on to our children through the bloodstream. It's something we have to stand up and fight for and protect and defend and then pass on to the next generation to do exactly the same thing. Ladies and I end with this simple question. Are you ready to defend freedom? Yes. I am, so let's get to it. God bless you and have a great CPAC.
Ladies and gentlemen, speaking on freedom of religion, please welcome Senator James Lankford.
Well, good morning and welcome to Florida. A few weeks ago, I proposed a very simple amendment on the Senate floor. It stated no federal dollars for cities and states that treat churches, synagogues, and mosques differently than they treat restaurants, stores, and offices during the COVID pandemic. It's pretty simple. If you allow bars and beauty shops to be open, you should allow churches and faith-based entities to be open. You would think that that vote would be a no-brainer, except it wasn't. In a squeaker vote, the First Amendment won 51-49 in the United States Senate. I am sure Madison and Hamilton would be thrilled at the passion for religious liberty in the current United States Senate. Here's one of the many things that make our nation so special. In America, every person has the right to have any faith of their choosing or to have no faith at all, and you are still a great American. You don't have to take off your faith when you leave your house. You don't have to take off your faith when you leave church. In fact, I would remind this group, if you don't practice your faith every day, you really don't have a faith. You just have a religious hobby. Your faith should have an impact on you. In America, you can be a Baptist or you can be Baha'i. You can be a Methodist or you can be a Muslim. You can be Jewish or Jehovah's Witness. You can be Hindu or heathen. You can be a member of a Buddhist temple, or you can be a member at the Greater New Mount Zion Holy Ghost Missionary Church. You can declare you're an agnostic and you're still faith shopping, or you can declare that you're an atheist and you don't believe Psalm 53 where it says, the fool says in his heart there is no God. That's your right as an American. If you're Muslim, you want to pray 5 times a day, it's your right. If you're Jewish, you want to gather with others and read the Torah, that is your right. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ like I am and want to tell other people about the power of God's forgiveness and his incredible love for us, that is my right. Last Sunday when I went to church, yes, I know I went to church during a time of COVID, which shows I live in Oklahoma, not in California, where you can go to swanky restaurants, but not to church. I even dared to sing in church, contrary to California doctrine. Last Sunday, when I gathered with people at church and talked about the goodness of God, it was good for my soul. Quite frankly, the whole world seems to be gripey. Have you noticed we're getting gripey lately? I think some people need a little Jesus in their life. A week ago, I could sit alone and I could read Psalm 46, which says, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in a time of trouble. Therefore, I will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. You know why I could sit and read that? Because I'm an American. That's why I could sit and read that. We can live our faith. The in-group in society doesn't get to define who can and cannot have faith, what their faith would look like in public or in private, because we have no established religion. Liberal professors, left-wing politicians can't push faith out of public view because they don't like it. We have a First Amendment. We don't have to submit to the in-crowd secular humanism. In the words of James Madison, your religious opinions are a property of particular value. Your faith is your property, not the government's property. It's like your car, your house, or your Browning 12 gauge. It is your property. The problem is, not everyone believes that. President Biden's nominee to lead HHS, Javier Becerra, as the Attorney General of California, he sued the Trump administration 100 times, and he led the lawsuit against people of faith like Little Sisters of the Poor, forcing them to choose between shutting down their ministry to elderly poor or to violate their religious beliefs. He worked to manage the faith of Californians. Yesterday, the House of Representatives passed the very ironically named Equality Act that specifically excludes, for the first time ever in law, that people of faith cannot say you have faith. You have to submit to what the House's will is. A couple of years ago in Montana, a mom tried to utilize a state scholarship fund to send her daughters to a Christian school, but the state of Montana has specific language in their constitution that doesn't allow state funds to be used at a religious school. That was argued all the way to the Supreme Court, where last year, the Supreme Court determined the state of Montana didn't have to create a scholarship program, but if it did, it could not discriminate against people of faith. You would think that that settled the issue, except there are 37 states in the United States, including my own, that have specific language in their constitution that requires them to discriminate against people of faith. It's called the Blaine Amendment. Those Blaine Amendments were written during a time of anti-Catholic fervor in our nation more than a century ago. That language needs to go. And if you're a state legislator, clear that bigoted language out of your state constitution. Last year, I was seated on the lawn of the White House, getting a sunburn because I'm a redhead, watching President Trump and the leadership of Israel, UAE, and Bahrain sign the Abraham Accords. The first Middle East peace treaty in decades. And as I sat there on the South Lawn watching the ceremony, I sat reading the Abraham Accords. I don't know if you've read that peace treaty, but here's how the Abraham Accords begin. We, the undersigned, recognize the importance of maintaining and strengthening peace in the Middle East and around the world based on mutual understanding and coexistence, as well as respect for human dignity, freedom, including religious freedom. Did I mention that was signed by Israel, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain? Freedom is breaking out in the Middle East while the left is trying to shut it down in America. But they cannot do that because we are Americans and we have the greatest Constitution in the world. Our founders risked their lives to establish a new nation where every person could freely practice their faith. But remember, the right to have your faith and live your faith is a right. You have to make it a reality by actually living your faith. Go live it. And I get to say this because I'm an American. God bless you, and God bless America.
Ladies and gentlemen, speaking on freedom of press, please welcome Alex Berenson.
Well, thank you. It's good to be in Florida, where it's 80 degrees. I'm honestly as surprised as any of you that I'm here. If you knew my voting record, you'd think I should be speaking at the ACLU, not CPAC. But times have changed, and the New York Times, where I used to work, has changed. I never would have imagined being on Fox regularly. Well, the Times either ignored me or tried to bash me. But it's not me, it's the Times. And columnists at the New York Times now regularly call for censorship. When you hear realities are, that's censorship. When you hear deplatforming Fox News, trying to get cable companies to drop Fox from their basic tier so that people have to pay extra for it when they don't have to pay extra for MSNBC or CNN, that's censorship. Whether it's government controlled or not, it's censorship. And the Times actually, and other elite media outlets, have gone beyond that now. Reporters spend significant amounts of time looking for people, public figures usually, but not always, who've said things they consider, words they consider bad, or have spouted ideas they consider bad, and trying to flog those people publicly. I don't know when that became journalism. It seems to be journalism now at the New York Times and other big outlets. But these people are frustrated. They're frustrated because they can't control the debate as completely as they would like. They're frustrated because 75 million people voted for Donald Trump, and they think that's a cataclysm. So they've actually turned to an even more powerful group. They've turned to big tech. They've turned to Amazon and Facebook and Apple and Google, the most powerful companies in the world right now, the biggest companies by market cap, the companies that in an information age are the information. And they've asked those places, they've beat on those places to help them censor. It is amazing to me to see journalists asking technology companies for help in censorship, but that's happening. And tech has agreed to this, partly out of ideology and partly because it's in their interest, it seems. And so we're at a time where Facebook will dump groups it doesn't like, where YouTube will prevent people from uploading videos that have information that runs, quote unquote, contrary to established health advice about COVID, when in reality that advice has changed over and over again. The guidance about masks, the guidance about whether antibodies are protective, the guidance about whether school openings may be dangerous, that's changed over and over again. But whatever today's official version is, you are in trouble if you try to speak out against it. And in June, Amazon would not let me publish this book. I was very lucky. Elon Musk and other people spoke up for me, and Amazon relented. But this censorship is still happening. There's lots of people who can't get their stuff published on Amazon, and it's not just about COVID. You may have seen earlier this week, Amazon stopped selling a book from a conventional publisher, a conservative but a conventional publishing house that was about, it's called When Harry Became Sally. It's about the transgender movement, and they decided for some reason they didn't like it and weren't going to sell it. So all of this, you know, it's happening together, and I'm not saying that, you know, that Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos are having a conference call about this, but it is by design. It is squeezing the flow of information, and it's extraordinarily dangerous for big companies to do this when they're quasi-monopolies. But journalists, the people who should be speaking out against this, are cheering it on. So this is especially true from my point of view when it comes to COVID, because these companies, notably Amazon, but Facebook too, Google too, they all profit from lockdowns. They profit from keeping you in your house, from destroying gatherings like this. And when ideology and profit are running the same way, it's almost impossible to get people to reconsider their actions or consider the negative consequences of their actions. So what can we do? You know, there's some of us out there who see these risks, and we're trying to talk about it, we're trying to fight about it. My badge says I'm self-employed, which is lucky for me. It means that I can speak without having to worry about what my masters at the Times want me to say, what their ideology of the day is. And there's other journalists out there who are self-employed, and I think we're starting to, you know, to fight. But the truth is, even though the badge says self-employed, it's not true. I'm employed by all of you. I'm employed by everybody out there who wants facts and data that don't come with an ideological spin, and I'm going to keep doing that, and I know other people are going to keep doing that. And so I am stuck with, or have fallen in with, or however you want to put it, the conservative movement. Because right now, you're more committed to freedom of thought and speech and debate than anyone else, and you should be proud of that. It is sad that people who think they know best won't even talk to you and won't even debate you. That's how. Are they scared, or what are they? I don't know, but it needs to stop. Freedom of debate and freedom of speech and freedom of the press, as we know, they're central to the United States. And I'm proud to announce that I'm going to have a book about the pandemic coming out called Pandemia. Regnery is publishing it. Regnery is a conservative publisher. That's not why I picked them. I picked them because I know they're going to let me write the book I want to write, and if it's criticizing Donald Trump, so be it, and if it's criticizing Joe Biden, so be it. And that's a guarantee that nobody else can make right now. So you can buy that book on Amazon right now. You can pre-order it. If Amazon will still sell it in 6 months, we'll see when it comes out. But one way or another, the truth is going to come out. And hopefully we'll all be there for it. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, speaking on freedom of assembly, please welcome Florida former Attorney General Pam Bondi.
Wow. Hi, everyone. Hi, Marcy. All right, quick question. What's it like to be in Florida? Right? So our kids can go to school. As you heard from previous speakers, we can go to church. And clearly, we can practice freedom of speech. So it's great to be in Florida, and we are open for business. You know, James Madison, back in 1791, was brilliant, if you think about it. All the speakers you've heard, freedom of religion, that ties into the freedom to assemble. Freedom of speech, of course, morphs into the freedom to assemble. So what do we have? Think about this. Picture this. You have a large room with people gathered together, men and women. They were very respectful to each other. They were kind, discussing issues that they care about for our country. I'm not talking about today. I'm talking about over 75 years ago in Montgomery, Alabama. events that paved the way for the future of our country. It was the NAACP, and it was a large hall that they put white tablecloths on and turned it into a meeting room. Women wearing beautiful dresses, men in suits, sitting there discussing civil rights. And they were told by the powers that be at the time that they couldn't, well, they were letting them practice. However, by association, they had to turn over business records, which they did, but they also wanted them to turn over every single member's name. Now, back 75 years ago, what would that have done? Jeopardize their safety, right? People wouldn't have, they would have lost their jobs. Their families could have been injured. So they tried to stop them that way. What happened? The Supreme Court came in and, of course, ruled in their favor. The court said the right of association and assembly is an inseparable aspect of liberty, expanding the scope of the rights of association and assembly to prevent states from discouraging citizens from participating in groups that were engaged in lawful and ethical activities. That case paved the way and really crystallized the right to assembly, the right of association for generations to come. There's a big case now before the Supreme Court where those protections are being challenged in California regarding donor information. So watch that and see what happens. You know, when I was Attorney General here in Florida, Rick Scott was governor, and Senator Scott now, and it was my biggest responsibility to uphold the Constitution, whether I agreed with it or not. I remember back in 2017, there was a person, he was a horrible person, and he was a white nationalist, and he was going to speak at University of Florida, my alma mater. So what did we do? Go Gators, right? Now, what did we do, though? The University of Florida was having him speak on campus. We knew there was going to be trouble. So Governor Scott, we didn't cancel him. We couldn't cancel him because as conservatives, we believe in the First Amendment. So what happened? Rick Scott, we had the National Guard. Rick had the National Guard on standby as a state of emergency. And I went out and encouraged all students not to attend. Don't go. Don't go, because there could have been trouble. But as conservatives, we did not cancel it, nor could we, because we believe in the First Amendment. In 1945, the court said, to peaceably assemble is one of the indispensable democratic freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. And it wasn't by accident or coincidence that the rights to freedom in speech and press were coupled in a single guarantee with the rights of the people to assemble. These are inseparable. Tocqueville said in the 1800s, Tocqueville was so, I guess, clairvoyant, you could say, in the 1800s in France, in no country of the world has the principle of association been more successfully used or unsparingly applied to multitude of different objects than in America, than in our great country. The right of acting for himself is that of combining those of fellow creatures and acting in common with all of them. No legislator can attack it without impairing the foundations of our society. So now fast forward all these years later and look at all of us here today. Matt Schlapp, thank you for CPAC. Where you have a group of like-minded individuals, and CPAC is the perfect illustration of the proper exercise of these rights. Peaceful, patriotic people banding together to advance the same common goals. As Tocqueville understood, it's the American way. Thank you, CPAC. God bless America, and God bless all of you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, speaking on freedom of petition, please welcome former Ohio State Treasurer Josh Mandel.
Good morning, CPAC. It's an honor to follow some of these public servants who've been so successful throughout the country, and I found in my time in public service, people have a lot of different goals. Some of the folks I've met, by the time they're 50, they want to be governor, or by the time they're 60, they want to be senator. I've tried to keep my goals relatively simple. By the time I was 40, I was just hoping to be shaving. I've been walking around CPAC, people are like, how old is this guy? So I'm 43 years old. I'm from the great state of Ohio. I'm a Marine Corps vet, did a couple tours in Iraq. I'm pro-life, pro-gun, pro-Trump. And more important than all that, I'm a proud dad to my 3 little kids, Rosie, Judah, and Gideon, who are back home. Thank you to Matt Schlapp and Mercy and to Dan, who invited me to speak here on the freedom to petition. I'd like to also thank Governor DeSantis, who has the state open for us. After the conclusion of the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Elizabeth William Powell put the question to Benjamin Franklin, have we got a republic or a monarchy? And Franklin famously replied, a republic if you can keep it. The decision by our founders to create a republican form of government, what Abraham Lincoln later described as government of the people, by the people, for the people, was a direct response to tyranny of the crown they had overthrown in the American Revolution. 11 years earlier, it was the Declaration of Independence that cited King George's refusal to redress the grievances of the American colonists, stating, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble of terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. The right to petition our government is fundamental, rooted in the Declaration, affirmed in the Bill of Rights, and is as essential to the American Republic today as any time in the last 234 years. But today that right is not infringed by a faraway despot with an army at his disposal, but by petty bureaucrats throughout the state governments and throughout Washington. This authoritarian state, deep state, if you will, not just by radical liberal governors, by Newsom in California and Cuomo in New York, but even by squishy Republican governors like my governor, DeWine, in the state of Ohio. Let me tell you what happened in the state of Ohio. Unfortunately, Republican governor, Rhino Governor DeWine, decided that he was going to lead the charge in shutting down Ohio before any state in the nation. And he had this lady named Amy Acton. She was sort of like the Fauci of Ohio, who the media trotted out as a hero, who DeWine trotted out as a hero, who the left trotted out as a hero, who the Republican establishment trotted out as a hero. And like in so many of your states, she was dead wrong. Her predictions, her numbers, her math were just wrong. She wasn't even in the ballpark of accurate. But the bureaucrats and the politicians use these bad numbers to trample on the liberty of families and small businesses and moms and dads throughout our state. I'm now running for the United States Senate in Ohio. Thank you. And guess who's running against me? This mini Fauci, Amy Acton, on the Democratic side. With a stroke of the pen, Governor DeWine shut down businesses throughout our state, like Tanya Hartman's bridal shop in Columbus. Her busiest months were usually March and April, and she was shut down. But what did she do? She exercised her right to petition. She sued the state of Ohio. She sued the governor. She sued the state government. She sued the politicians. She sued the bureaucrats. And she said, I'm a small business owner. I'm an Ohioan. I'm an American. I'm a taxpayer. I have the right to run my business and sell these bridal dresses and bridal supplies to any women and families who want to come in and buy them. In Columbus, Ohio, Tim Castle owns a gym. Citizens just wanted to come and work out. You guys probably know my friend Jim Jordan in the state of Ohio. Give him a hand. Whenever I talk to Jim, who I just love, you know what he always says to me? First question he asks, he says, hey, Joshy, you working out? Jim is a fighter among fighters. But think about it. Out here in this audience, Ohioans, anyone else around the country, why couldn't you go to a gym and work out? Why couldn't Tim Castle keep his business open? Because the politicians and the bureaucrats trampled on his liberty. But he exercised his right to petition. He sued the state government, and within 6 days was back open and people were there working out. Let me tell you about a store in Marietta, Ohio. Schaefer Leather Goods. 5th generation. They've been open 150 years. They sell work boots and cowboy boots to Ohioans who live right there on the river on the Ohio-West Virginia border. Governor DeWine and the state government made them shut down. But you know who they let stay open right down the street? Walmart. Now let's think about this for a second. We're the party of the little guy. We're the party of the working people. We're the party of moms and dads. We're the party of taxpayers and citizens and activists. How is it fair? How is it in line with the United States Constitution in any way, shape, or form to shut down Schaefer Leather Goods, where they're selling work boots and cowboy boots to Ohioans, but allow Walmart down the street to sell work boots and cowboy boots to those same consumers? And that's what the politicians did. That's what the bureaucrats did. But thank God, in this country founded and based in Judeo-Christian values, where we have movement conservative activists like yourself, where we have a party led by Donald J. Trump, are we able to fight the government? Are we able to fight tyranny? Are we able as citizens to bound together to combat this trampling on our liberties? When I joined the United States Marine Corps, I raised my right hand and took an oath to defend the Constitution, to defend our freedoms and our liberties. I don't know who this guy is who keeps screaming freedom, but can you come to Ohio and travel around with me? We got to bring you on the campaign trail. Freedom! 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 Thank you all for having me. You Yitz? Are you Yitz? I see a keeper. Where's Yitz? All right. What's your name? David. Hey, I'm Josh.
Does the Bill of Rights matter? The First Amendment, it matters. We conservatives believe in the rule of law because we know that when the law is enforced, our rights are protected. That's why we're doing such a big effort at this CPAC to talk about the Bill of Rights. But I also want to mention one thing, and I know this might sound like a little bit of a downer, but we also believe in property rights, and this is a private hotel. And we believe in the rule of law, so we need to comply with the laws of this county that we're in. But a private hotel, just like your house, gets to set its own rules. Carly, our CPAC director.
Well, as Dan mentioned, we are in a private facility, and we do want to be respectful of the ordinances that they have as their private property. So please, everyone, when you're in the ballroom, when you're seated, you should still be wearing a mask. So if everybody can go ahead, work on that. I know it's not the most fun.
You have the right. You have the right to set the own rules in your own house, and we're borrowing somebody else's house. So we need to comply with their rules. So thank you all for putting on your masks. I wear a mask when I'm in the halls, and we're going to comply with their rules.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good conference.
The last samurai is right back. Hello, America. Hello, American conservatives. My name is Genki Fuji. I'm a Japanese journalist and an author of more than 70 books on international relations. I run online World Forecast News Service. I respect President Trump and American conservatives. President Trump fought against Chinese communists in order to protect the entire free world. President Trump, he's a real American samurai. I want to make US-Japan alliance stronger. I want to build solid friendship with real American patriots or American samurai. Let's fight together for freedom. Let's slash the cancel culture. Let's start US-Japan Samurai to Samurai Alliance.
This corridor is more than an energy project. It's an attack the weak against the strong.
We as conservatives have ultimate faith in people.
This is Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus.
Give it to God. He is doing this for a reason.
This is about veterans as they see themselves.
This is one sick person.
There is a way to find justice.
At home with me, Paula Dean.
I show you how to be happy in a hurry.
Absolutely beautiful.
We have a history. We should learn from the history.
I think the best way you can thank me for being a veteran is be a good American.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Liberals spent a record amount of dark money to elect Biden. Now they are cashing in. Ron Klain led a top dark money group. Now, Chief of Staff Gina McCarthy, from dark money to climate advisor, canceling the Keystone Pipeline, killing good union jobs. And why won't Biden reopen the schools, teachers' unions, and their dark money? From personnel to policy, Biden is just starting to pay back all that dark money.
What are you doing? Need a box and a shipping label?
No. I missed the sign-up period for my health care. So now I need to make it to next year without getting hurt.
Did you look into Liberty Health Share? Sign up any time of year.
No, I didn't.
Didn't think so.
Ow!
What are you doing? Training for the circus?
No, I'm trying to sign up for my health care. A lot of hoops to jump through.
Did you look into Liberty Health Share?
No!
Didn't think so.
Your ideas, innovations, and inventions are precious. Don't let patent pirates steal your treasure. Support American innovation by passing the Stronger Patents Act. You will be helping American inventors and our economy. Learn more at SaveTheInventor.com. Stolen inventions tell no tales. Stop big tech and their patent pirating ways. Support American innovation by passing the Stronger Patents Act. You will be helping American inventors and our economy. Learn more at SaveTheInventor.com.
Murders on the rise, faster than ever before. Biden appoints Vanita Gupta for a top job in the Justice Department. She supports defunding the police, led a group that wants to reduce punishments on white supremacists, even terrorists. When our cities burned, Gupta could have stood for law and order, for victims. Instead, she advocated to let convicts out of jail. Biden promised unity, but this is a dangerous appointee at a dangerous time.
This corridor is more than an energy project. It's an attack the weak against the strong.
We as conservatives have ultimate faith in people.
This is Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus.
Give it to God. He is doing this for a reason.
This is about veterans as they see themselves.
This is one sick person.
There is a way to find justice.
At home with me, Paula Dean.
I show you how to be happy in a hurry.
Absolutely beautiful.
We have a history. We should learn from the history.
I think the best way you can thank me for being a veteran is be a good American.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Ladies and gentlemen, our first panel today is Tolerance Reimagined, the angry mob and violence in our streets. Please welcome our panel, Spencer Brown from the Young America's Foundation, Wayne Dupree of The Wayne Dupree Show, T.W. Shannon, CEO of Chickasaw Community Bank, and your moderator, Fox News contributor, Lawrence Jones.
Woo! It's good to be here at CPAC this year. How y'all doing? We got a great panel for you guys today. We're going to start from the very beginning because we're going to talk about the mob, but we got to talk about where the mob comes from. So I spent 2 years covering the mob on college campuses. That's where it originated. This is where all they got, all the ammo, the professors, the indoctrination. Spencer, talk about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at everything we've seen in the streets over the last couple months, if we look at the cancel culture that's just pervading entertainment, Hollywood, things like that, you can trace it all back to one place, and that's college campuses. You know, you used to cover it. I've spent 5.5 years with Young America's Foundation going to more than 30 campuses with our speakers to see what happens when a conservative shows up. And you can't imagine what it's like until you do it. And it all goes back to sort of this core curriculum of the left, which are these ideas of intersectionality, of critical race theory, and it sets up students to feel like they're just always the victim and that any action is allowable in order to try to rectify that supposed injustice.
And then you got the conservative speakers that went on college campuses. In 2017, UC Berkeley, it was literally on fire.
With the Berkeley situation, watching the videos and stuff like that, you're wondering, how are these people getting away with this type of mentality, this violent, you know, with not, just because somebody wanted to say that we want to save America or that we have another view, but to see that type of violence, to see gates thrown in the air or fire thrown in, that's, you know, just to have that try to shut down another person's view of things, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. TW, everything really started to come to a head after the election of Donald Trump, where the leaders on the other side said, if you disagree with these guys, you got to get in their face. You got to harass their elected officials. You got to meet them at airports. When they're sitting down eating with their family, you got to come and show them that you mean business. And it was violent.
Absolutely. You know, first of all, let me bring you greetings from Oklahoma, the state where Donald Trump won all 77 counties. And by the way, Matt Schlapp hadn't approved me to say this yet, but in case it hasn't been said, he is still the leader of this party. Make no doubt about it. Donald Trump is. But you're exactly right. You know, the election of Donald Trump just exposed the left for who they really are. They're intolerant. They don't want you to have your own ideas. If you don't toe the line of exactly saying what they want you to say, think what they want you to think, then you're canceled. That's what they're about. Every one of us that's a black conservative can really speak to it because they've tried to keep us on that Democrat plantation for 250 years. But I tell you what, it ends. And I will also say, I will also tell you something that Donald Trump said that I think the left has really been exposed for. He said something when he first got elected that stuck out to me. He said that they're not after me, they're after you. I'm just in the way. And we've seen that. Not only did they cancel the president of the United States on social media, but they've gone after conservative after conservative. And I will tell you what, until we unite and bring this party together, they're going to continue to do it. So I'll just say this, Lawrence, I appreciate you and what you do every day on Fox to bring home what it means to really be a conservative and what it means to expand the ideas of liberty, because that's what it's all about.
Thank you, I appreciate it. You talk about Fox, and I don't think you can talk about Fox without talking about the mainstream media as well. Because there has been narratives that have been put in the atmosphere, which is why Americans are so at each other's throat right now. It is a profitable business model now to have people at each other's throats. And I travel around the country during the election. I went to the Biden folks, I went to the Trump folks, I got to see everybody. And a lot of the issues, Wayne, most Americans agreed on. They agreed on it.
You're right.
But you wouldn't see that when you watch the media. Why is that?
Oh man, it's a money sport. It's a money sport. You got to put those cracker commercials on, and you know you got to put those swimsuit commercials on. You know, anything that is going to raise money for these networks, they got to get it on. But they have to make sure that we, amongst each other, are angry. They don't put a whole lot of people working together. You don't see a whole lot of. CNN used to have a documentary, Being Black in America. They would show the poverty situations and this and that, but they rarely would show the success of black Americans that was happening. It was always the bad side. And with the people that, with my listeners that call on the show, they're like, we look to the leadership, and the leadership can't get along. This thing has been happening for decades. The leadership can't get along. You have those individuals that are sitting up there, yeah, we work for you, we listen to you, but they don't go into the community to talk to us. Yeah. So you have a whole lot of attitudes festering in the communities, and they're fussing the same way that the leaders are fussing.
TW, I want to pick up on that because in order to understand the mob, you got to understand what's happening in the culture, what's happening in Black America. And I know you say that they want to keep folks in chains and all that, but I'm a reporter. I'm in Baltimore, south side of Chicago. I go to Dallas. I go to Philly. And when I talk to Black America, they're sick and tired of the politics that are happening, but they want that message from Republicans, from conservatives, for them. Now, they're traditionally conservative, but what can they do? Because in order to get rid of the mob, you got to provide an alternative. What is that alternative from the party?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. The first thing you have to understand is the mentality of the mob. How do we get to the mob? And there's one way you get to a mob, and I don't care if you're a mob on the left or you're a mob on the right or you're a mob in some, Middle Eastern country. The mob is established when there is a sense of hopelessness. And the left, what they do is they control the narrative and tell everybody you're hopeless. Even whether you're a minority, whether you're a white male, which has fallen out of favor with the left, it doesn't matter if you're a woman, if you're anybody other than an illegal alien, they have certain appreciation for that subgroup. But the reality is this: mobs happen when people have a sense of hopelessness. That's why people were burning down cities in around the country in the summer, because those Democrat mayors around the country offered no hope. The reason that people stormed the Capitol was because they felt hopeless because of a rigged election. That's where mobs happen. That's where it happens. And so how do you defeat the mob? How do you change the mob? Well, you have to understand who's created the most hopelessness around the world historically. Where has hopelessness come from around the world? It's come from government. Yes, government has created hopelessness for millions and millions of people. And what's the left's answer to hopelessness? More government. It's a trick of the left. And because they've owned the narrative, because they have for too many years decided, who is a valued person and who isn't. Just imagine this, Lawrence. Just think about just a year ago. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary when Dr. Fauci told us we only needed 2 weeks. If we lock down for 2 weeks, we're going to be fine. We're coming up on an anniversary of that. But just imagine a world where we had to wake up in the United States of America and wait to hear from our local mayor whether we were essential or non-essential. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. We as conservatives, we know that every single individual is essential. And the idea that we would allow a totalitarian government to tell us who's essential and who's not essential, it's scary. And the thing that scares me the most is that we didn't have enough conservatives standing up and saying, no, enough is enough. And so back to your question, how do you offer hope to a hopeless generation? You offer hope, number one, through faith. That's the first way that you offer hope. And then, and number two is self-governance. And we saw this, and I don't want to take up too much time. I get real passionate about it. Having been the former Speaker of the House for the state of Oklahoma, we saw it firsthand how a government can start to unleash opportunity in people. But the reality is this: we have a finite time, and we have to, every single generation of Americans, we have to continue to expand what it means to be American and what liberty means in this country. But we have to fight for it. We can't allow it we can't allow it to languish. And we saw it in this last pandemic. We saw how the left will use any excuse for power. They will use any excuse that they can to garner power. We saw it during the pandemic when the left stood up and said that they are going to use exceptional government power to keep you in your home, to keep you fearful, and to keep you afraid of one another. I think enough is enough.
Yep. It wasn't just the left too. Some Republicans went along with it as well and imposed lockdowns as well. But you know, a lot of them they're not here to speak at this conference. Spencer, I want to go to you because TW touched on this, the pandemic, and I want to make the correlation to what happened over the summer because I think the hearts and minds of a lot of folks were in a different spot. They have seen the state abuse their power. They've seen the state tell people that they couldn't leave their home. They saw the state drag mothers away from playgrounds because they wanted to play with their kids outside. The way conservatives viewed the state was much different over this summer. We used to just have a mantra of just back the blue, and we do back the blue when the blue black backs the law. But when the state abuses its power, we're upset about that. So then we pivot during the summer. Sean Hannity was the first person to play the full video of what happened to George Floyd. And he talked about the abuses of the state. Talk about how we stand up righteously when the state abuses its power. But then when violence is in the street, we got to object to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, this summer saw a lot of things, I think, just laid bare in general about where things are at in this country, how people are feeling. My team and I were out in the streets of Washington, D.C. through a lot of the stuff this summer, documenting it, trying to figure out and talk to people, what do we see going on? And I think one of the things that obviously was not covered on most of the media networks was if you went to Black Lives Matter Plaza in D.C., just right outside the White House, you saw so many shockingly liberal women, white women, yelling in the faces of black police officers. Yeah. And it was just unreal, and you didn't see that anywhere else. And it showed you how much division there is and how much the left has convinced people that somehow being a police officer makes you a bad person, and that if you, as a white woman in your Lululemon leggings, stands up and starts screaming at them, you're somehow working towards racial justice. And it was just shocking to see a situation like that happen again and again. I think for our students especially, it made things very difficult for them as conservatives because they saw their communities rallying behind one group and telling them that if they ever supported the police, they're now just across the board evil and they should not be given a platform or any sort of a seat at the table to talk about these issues, which you should be talking about. You know, we object to the left being obsessed with power, so we need to make sure that when there is power given to certain people, they're using it responsibly.
That's right.
And it was just so hard on campuses to have that conversation because those venues for the free and open exchange of ideas have just been destroyed by the left. And so it took a lot more work in order to be able to have people willing to sit down and have those tough conversations. If you can sit down and, like we are, have a conversation about what the role of police is, you can actually come to some common ground like you were saying earlier. But the problem is because the left doesn't want you to have a seat at the table, they'd rather flip the table, that just doesn't happen.
Spencer talks about, Wayne, about the white women protesters that got in the fight in the faces of the black officers and were screaming in their face, condemning them, just being nasty to them. But there's another element. I was on the ground in all these cities when the protests were happening. And there were some people that were on the ground that were peaceful. Yeah. They had righteous anger, right? But I saw a lot of white anarchists on the ground with Antifa yelling in their face when they told them, stop throwing stuff at the cops. One time I was there, and one of the ladies looked at the black folks and said, look, they're going to kill you anyway. So we got to address these anarchists that are on the ground, that are stirring the pot, and they have an agenda. Right. It's not for Black lives. Right. It is not for justice for all. Right. It's so that they can have power. Talk about that.
And you know what? And I wish that a whole lot more people online saw or would agree with what you just said, because there was a situation where I think some Asian women were painting Black Lives Matter signs on buildings. And a couple of young black women were coming in, don't do that. We didn't do that. Why are you putting us up there and then you're making it look like we're doing that? Just like you said, there's a huge agenda out there, and it's for pitting us against each other. Somebody's getting paid as a whole. I mean, well, you know, you can say there's a whole lot of money passing hands, and then those people on the top, they're laughing. They're laughing, and they're seeing America tear at its fabric on the bottom within those communities that you said that you saw. And I just wish that a whole lot more people would be a whole lot more honest, just like with what you said. I wish that a lot of people would see those same things come out and say, you know what? These people are trying to put us against each other. We have to stand up and say, no, we are America. We can fix this. There are people on the other side that want peace. We can talk to them. We can work this out. But we have to come to that conclusion.
You want to pick up on that, TW?
You know, I would say this. We're talking about the role of the state in our lives. And, when I ran for state representative of Oklahoma, I was 27 years old. When I knocked on people's doors, I heard two things. Well, really three things. They said, fix the roads, fix the schools, and leave us alone. That's what I heard when I knocked doors. Yeah. And we saw this experiment over the last year. You have two worlds. You have a state like Florida and Texas versus states like California and New York.
Right.
A state that said, there's a problem that we have, we need more government. We need bigger government. We need government to fix the problem. Then you've got states like Florida and Texas who said, yes, government has a role in keeping people protected, but government cannot impede on the civil liberties of individuals. And we've seen the difference. And as a result, you're seeing this administration threaten to keep people from traveling to states like Florida, right? The left doesn't want you to see what freedom looks like because light always outshines darkness, and it exposes darkness for what it is. And that's why it's so important that we as conservatives, that we're vocal and we tell our story. It's not enough just to be right. Yes, we're right on taxes, we're right on life, we're right on the Constitution, we're right on national defense. It's not enough to just be right. You have to go tell your story. In your classroom, you have to tell your story. On your job, you have to tell your story because we're right on the issues.
And you know what? Don't think that people won't listen. Herman Cain told me during an interview one time, Wayne, just because somebody doesn't accept what you say the first time doesn't mean that you stop telling your message. Yeah. Everybody's not going to accept what you say. Don't get mad. Move on. Yeah. Somebody's going to hear you, and they might not even come back during that same day, but they might come back a little and keep on living your conservative lives too. If there's something that I learned in church a long time ago, is that if you live a Christian life and you live it to the fullest and you show people that God is within you, that draws people to you. Yeah. So if you have you live your conservative life and you do it the right way, God's gonna bless you. Somebody's gonna be like, I want what that person got. Yeah. So then you just keep on talking, keep on spreading conservatism. Again, don't get mad because I don't want to hear it. Don't worry about that. Because somebody else way in the back, I want to hear what that person got to say.
Yeah, that's true. I'm a preacher's kid, so I can just say amen.
All right.
So, Spencer, you can't talk about the mob without talking about the mob destruction of business, right? And we had two mobs over the summer. We had the mob of the state that decided that they were going to literally say businesses could not open. And then you had the mob of the violence that decided that they were going to set the businesses on fire. We were doing great when it comes to the economy. Black women under Donald Trump had the #1 businesses, black small businesses, black women, right? Led the way, led the way. What are your thoughts on the mob of the state and the mob of the violence?
Well, the mob of the state showed just how much damage government that sees an opportunity to make a power grab and takes it can do in a very small amount of time. I mean, you can look, we mentioned states like New York and California where they were very effective at wielding that power and they didn't follow the science at all. I mean, if you look at the science across the board right now, we could have so much more open. We could have kids back in school. We could have college campuses, students getting back together into that community. But instead, they saw the opportunity to take this power. And on that point, what scares me is now they realize how easy it is to do that.
Yeah.
We did not put up, I don't think, enough of a fight when it comes to following the science. And now they realize all it takes, a virus with scientific backing that you all of a sudden just ignore the science on, we'll still go along with it. Yeah. So that's what scares me about the mob of the state and how they realize they can wield that power. Then at the same time, just out of example, Washington, D.C., where I live, you have Mayor Bowser shutting down the city, getting rid of indoor dining, doing all these ridiculous things. And then you have the violence breakout.
Yep.
And so all these businesses that weren't even making an income because they weren't open or able to do anything now also don't have a business to reopen because it's either been firebombed, the windows have been shattered out, everything has just been destroyed and taken from these people. That happened not just in DC, that happened back home in Minneapolis, where a number of people I know had their businesses destroyed by rioters, excuse me. And you just see how it was sort of a 1-2 punch that set these businesses back. And you have all these small, mom and pop businesses, all these minority-owned businesses that are now looking at, okay, even if we can reopen based on CDC guidelines or Dr. Fauci finally deciding that we can actually follow the science, they don't have anything to reopen.
Wow. Wayne, the state didn't just say close down. They allowed that to happen. And then they allowed the businesses to be burned as well. But the state, after telling us all of this, decided they weren't going to give money to these businesses to repair.
Just the last year, just watching it happen to these businesses, and I felt bad for them, as we all felt bad for them, because so many people were like getting on TV and they were letting people know they're killing what I destroyed. And then on top of that, the mob came and destroyed what the government didn't destroy. The mobs came and did it destroy. To watch the money come, and then some of the people said that they didn't even get any money. I was sitting in, I'm trying to figure out, and I'm not backing any of the mob, period. But you know what I'm going to say? What do you expect when you shut down people? What do you expect when you take people's livelihood away that have had businesses for 40 and 50 years, mom and pop shops?
Yeah.
And then you give them $600 to last for about 5 months. Or you put police in front of their businesses so they can, what do these state governments think that people are going to do? America's spirit has always been to fight back.
Yeah.
It's always been to fight back and stand up for liberty. I feel sorry for all of those businesses, and I pray that a lot of those businesses come back. I don't know if they're going to come back.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're going to come back. But I tell you this, there's a whole lot of American spirit out there that's not going to quit.
Yeah.
They aren't going to quit, and they aren't going to run away. And that's what I think is more scary to a whole lot of these government officials, because they're seeing a whole lot of people saying, you're not going to put me down. I'm going to stand up for my rights.
Yeah. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. TW, I can go off on the Democrats all day, but this is what I expect from them.
Yeah.
What about the Republicans? Can we talk about Republicans? Is that fair? Is that fair? Is that fair?
Yeah.
What about the Republicans that allowed this to happen?
Yep.
They'll give a fiery speech on the floor. They'll tell you during election time they're fighting for you. They'll send you a mailer and all that. But when it came down to it, some Republican states, some Republican areas allowed this to happen. Will there be consequences?
There absolutely will be consequences. Never underestimate the power of the American people. The American people are not stupid. And I think that's one of the things that the left picks up on, that they miss so often. The reality is we are living in a time in our country where individual liberty is under attack like never before. I mentioned before the tale of two cities, the tale of two types of states, California and Florida, and I put Oklahoma in there in many regards, versus states like New York and California. It was an experiment. Does liberty, do free markets, does capitalism, does it still work during a pandemic? Can it still survive during a global pandemic? Well, Florida and the state of Texas say that it can. It actually can. It can thrive. It can actually thrive. I'm a banker. We had one of the best years that we've ever had in our business because our state is having such a great year in Oklahoma. The reason it works is because our principles that our founding fathers found, they still work. But when we talk about how do you push back against the state, number one, we as conservatives, we've got to do a better job of electing people at every level of government. We need people running on the school board. We need people running in city elections.
Yep.
And we need to hold Republicans accountable who don't toe the line for freedom, free markets, and capitalism. And maybe most importantly, we've got to protect our Second Amendment rights, because it all starts right there with the Second Amendment.
That's good stuff. I got to ask you, I don't want to talk about this too long, but we got to address what happened at the Capitol. Because some people decided to disgrace the movement by storming the Capitol. And when I'm in the airport, when I'm talking in communities, they tell me they're upset at the people that stormed the Capitol is because they gave the liberal media credibility in that moment. It was everything that they had described the Trump and the MAGA movement before it even ever happened as. Yeah. And the majority of people, they don't believe in that. They don't believe in assaulting cops at the Capitol, storming the Capitol, saying hang Mike Pence. They don't believe that. And so there was a mourning period because they have always been painted that way. What would you say to the people in this audience that feel just like that? That's you, Wayne. That's you.
Look, you're talking to somebody that covered it and got kicked off YouTube for covering it. I don't know, man. I'm serious. I don't know. I mean, I go back to what I said before. There's a lot of people there. There's a lot of people there. The Antifa was there. BLM was there. MAGA people were there. Yeah. Everybody was there. And if Joe Biden wants to talk unity, there was unity there on that day because America is sick and tired of being pushed down. And we're sorry for, well, a lot of people are sorry for what happened there. But in watching the individuals do those things and whatnot, all I can say is somebody, I really don't know. There's so many emotions with that.
Well, I'll tell you.
There's so many emotions with that, Lauren.
I'll tell you what it is, and Spencer, I'll let you pick up on this. During the summer, I saw people that were peaceful, and then you saw people that were violent at night. I condemned it, and I said it was wrong. And then I saw people that peacefully protested. The president came and spoke to them, and then there were some knuckleheads decided that they were going to storm the Capitol. And I condemned that. I guess what I'm saying is maybe we're more alike than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah.
Maybe, just maybe, in every movement, there are bad apples, and there are people that stand when their liberties, or they feel like their liberties, aren't being taken seriously. So maybe, just maybe, we should start looking at each other as Americans, and when there is disagreements, we should duke it out intellectually. Go ahead, I'll let you pick up.
Round of applause for that for sure. No, you're exactly right. There are bad apples on either side, and this is something we see when we go to college campuses all the time. You know, anytime we show up on a liberal campus, there's bound to be opposition. And a lot of times that opposition is peaceful. There's a First Amendment zone. Our same right that allows conservatives to speak on that campus allows the liberal students to protest peacefully and following the guidelines outside, and that is totally fine with us. We invite everybody who disagrees to come in. We give them first preference to ask a question of our speaker. There's nothing wrong with that lively and robust free exchange of ideas. That's what we need to have. But then you do have these groups on both sides, like you pointed out, where whether it's Antifa at Berkeley or somebody somewhere else, they mess up the whole system and this idea that, again, we should all be able to come together and say we are either in a country, Americans first, or on a college campus, we're all students here working towards this same goal of learning and hearing new ideas and broadening our horizons. And that just gets completely thrown to the side whenever somebody decides to choose violence, physical violence, over, like you were saying, duking it out intellectually, which is what college should be. That's why you go, is to have these hard discussions, and the left has just completely taken that away.
TW, I cannot end this panel without giving the folks out there a call to action, right? We just can't talk about the mob, the violence. We can't talk about the GOP. We just cannot talk about it without sending them out there to do something about it. What is your message to them?
My message to conservatives today is, number one, do not buy the left's message of identity politics. This country was founded on the idea of the individual. Yes, we can collectively come together and form a government that protects people, that protects liberty, but the idea that we are all based upon these individual categories and demographics, who stormed the Capitol, who didn't storm the Capitol, who was it that was rioting this summer? It was individuals, and those individuals need to be held accountable, and they should be. And the reason is, when you buy into this idea of identity politics, the reason it creates a challenge is because all of a sudden America, you start buying into the idea of the left's idea that America is systemically racist. Now, you've heard that. How many of you have heard that before? Systemically racist. Well, let me tell you today, America is not systemically racist. America is the land of systemic opportunity. And it is a place for systemic opportunity for any man, any woman, any gender, any sex, any individual who wants to work hard, who wants to save, and who wants to give back to their community. That's who we are, and that's our message as conservatives. So my message to conservatives today is, don't buy into the idea of identity politics. We're better than that. And don't buy into the idea that there's a civil war in our party. There's no civil war here. We are united. Now, we're not like the Democrats. We're not going to think like they do. We don't line up all together in a single file line and do exactly what we're told from people at the top. That's not who we are. We're going to have a debate 4 years from now about who our nominee is. But right now, we are a united party standing against Joe Biden and the radical left who's trying to turn us into a socialist country. That's who we are.
And you know what? And I think that you also have to add on to that is what you said earlier, and I said all the time on my radio show. You have to get into community politics. You have to get into local elections. A lot of Democrats are running these neighborhoods and communities. And when you come out of your door, you be like, well, how did that happen? Well, when did that get put there? Well, you have to start going to these meetings. And if you can't go by yourself, go in a group. As a matter of fact, put y'all's names up to run on to the community politics. That's how you start taking back the state. Because a whole lot of these issues with these machines and stuff, it didn't happen in D.C., it happened in the state. And a whole lot of these Democrats pushed a whole lot of this machines and stuff, and then when we look at it, well, how did that happen? Like I said, community politics. I know it's not sexy. You know, you won't be called state senator or whatnot, but that's where the battle lies, is in the community. You fix the community, you fix the neighborhood, the state follows, then the government follows, but you really got to start at home in your neighborhoods.
It's true. Spencer, what's your call to action?
Yeah, well, we were talking about, the country in general, but I want to speak specifically to students both here and those who are watching at home or wherever. We talked about how it feels to be hopeless and alone. And I think, and I know from working with them, so many conservatives, whether it's high school or college, feel completely isolated and alone, like they're the only people who believe in the things that we believe in. And I hope that through gatherings like CPAC and watching this kind of thing, you realize that you are not alone. You are not some sort of extremist to believe in the free market or to believe that all people are created equal. This is your chance to decide to stand up and be bold advocates for these ideas. And when you do that, you have rooms full of people just like this who will back you up, who will defend you in court, and who will make sure you get covered on TV or wherever else radio it may be. You are not alone, and it's worth standing up and fighting for these ideas, no matter what the left calls you or tells you. And like you were saying, even though they might be screaming at you today on campus, they're hearing what you're saying and the ideas that you're proposing. Right. Those are going to stick with them, and this is the time in their life where you can actually change their mind.
Amen. I'll tell you, I'll leave you with this, and I say this every year. My value system came from the home. The history that was taught to me. I'll fight like Frederick Douglass. I'll build like Booker T. Washington. And when it comes down to defend myself, I'll do it like Harriet Tubman. Thank you so much for having me.
What are you doing? Need a box and a shipping label?
No. I missed the sign-up period for my health care. So now I need to make it to next year without getting hurt.
Did you look into Liberty Health Share? Sign up any time of year.
No, I didn't.
Didn't think so. What are you doing? Training for the circus?
No. I'm trying to sign up for my health care. A lot of hoops to jump through.
Did you look into Liberty Health Share?
No.
Didn't think so.
This corridor is more than an energy project. It's an attack the weak against the strong.
We as conservatives have ultimate faith in people.
This is Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus.
Give it to God. He is doing this for a reason.
This is about veterans as they see themselves.
This is one sick person.
There is a way to find justice.
At home with me, Paula Dean.
I show you how.
And I got to say, what an amazing array of speakers here at CPAC. For a second there, I thought we were in Des Moines. That one took people a minute. We are gathered in dark times. We're gathered at a time where the hard left, where the socialists control the levers of government, where they control the White House, where they control every executive branch, where they control both houses of Congress. Bernie is wearing mittens. And AOC is telling us she was murdered. And the media desperately wants to see a Republican civil war. Liberty is under assault, and what are we going to do? I'll tell you, we will fight. Listen to William Wallace. And let me tell you, the media here looks at the men and women gathered here, at the young people gathered here, as dangerous radicals. This is the Rebel Alliance. And Vader and the Emperor, and let's be clear, they're not your father, are terrified of the rebels who are here, and I'm proud to tell you, Gina Carano is standing with us. So what do we do? What do we do at a time where the hard left is resurgent? Two very simple things. Number one, we defend liberty. Look, are there tensions in our party? Sure, because we believe in diversity. We believe in individuality. Different people have different views. We aren't the Borg enforcing. Okay, I may have committed a cardinal sin mixing Star Wars and Star Trek. Next thing you know, you're going to cross the streams and the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man's going to come. We were just too many terrible references there. We don't believe in uniformity, but I'll tell you what can unite conservatives and libertarians and those who value the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is a love of liberty. And the left, they tell you who they are, particularly in a global pandemic. As Rahm Emanuel said, you never want to waste a good crisis. And who boy, these guys don't want to waste it. You see statists in California putting 37 tons of sand in a skate park because ain't nobody having fun while the socialists are in charge. We see Bill de Blasio in New York sending people in to shut down parks and to throw young Orthodox Jewish kids out of the parks because, God forbid, children have fun. We see leftists across the country shutting down churches. California, they've helpfully explained, you can go out and protest. You can scream and yell, abolish the police. And this virus, magically, no one will get infected. You can French kiss the guy next to you, yelling, abolish the police. And no one will get infected. But if you go to church and say, amazing grace, everyone's going to die. By the way, how many of y'all have eaten at a restaurant in the last 6 months? Can I just stop and say how strange the rules are right now? I want to understand how this virus works. So when you walk in, you got to put your mask on. Sadly, I've got two. You walk in, you got to put your mask on. You sit down, you take your mask off. See, apparently the virus is actually connected to elevation. No, remember, this is all about science. It's actually, it may not be elevation. I think it's that there are hormones that are released in your thighs when you're sitting. So you can sit at the table and there's no virus being transmitted. But if you stand up, put the mask on. And listen, let's be clear, this is a dangerous virus. But these collectivist statists, okay, now they're saying everybody can get immunized. We can have herd immunity everywhere, and we're going to wear masks for the next 300 years. And by the way, not just one mask, 2, 3, 4. You can't have too many masks. How much virtue do you want to signal? This is just dumb. You know, the U.S. Capitol has giant fences with razor wires and 5,000 National Guards standing out front because the Democrats are convinced that political theater helps them. Let's be clear, this is not about security at this point. This is about political theater. Half the country, the deplorables, are dangerous. And they're going to turn the Capitol into a military outpost in Baghdad just to have their compliant media echo that message. But do you know what terrifies every one of these statists? The truth. Liberty's powerful. Liberty's persuasive. Liberty is fun. You know, last week, we lost the great Rush Limbaugh. I was so blessed and so fortunate to call Rush a friend. And Rush understood the power of liberty. You know, before there was Hannity, before there was Tucker, before there was Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder, before there was Donald Trump, there was Rush Limbaugh. And before there was Section 230, there was something called the Fairness Doctrine, which gave leftists in Washington the power to silence views they didn't like. We got rid of the Fairness Doctrine, and Rush Limbaugh started by going on one AM station, and then a second AM station, and then a third, and then a fourth, and then a fifth, and the voice of liberty spread like prairie fire. And let me tell you right now, in Los Angeles, there's some skater kid who's 19, who's told that it's hip and chic and cool to be a leftist socialist man, who's going to hear a message, wait a second, these guys don't want me to speak, think, have fun, do what I want to do? The message of liberty is profoundly subversive. The left believes in rigid conformity. We believe in diversity, free speech. You can say whatever you want, no matter how dumb it is. And by the way, in Washington, D.C., we test that proposition. Religious liberty, you can worship however you like on your knees before Almighty God. Or you can worship the almighty dollar. Or you can worship, I don't know, pink Martians. That's the beauty of freedom, the Second Amendment. Oh, the left hates the Second Amendment. Because they want their people docile and compliant. You know, when we saw riots all across the country, I remember there were reports that riots were going to come into suburban, mostly peaceful, fiery but mostly peaceful. There were reports riots were going to come into the suburbs. I got to tell you, in Houston, where I live, there weren't any rioters. Because let's be very clear, if there had been, they would discover what the state of Texas thinks about the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. So defend liberty. But number two, have fun. Have fun. You know, so many on the right, they act like they got a stick inserted somewhere it doesn't belong. Like, just lighten up. Especially now, the left, they are shrill. They are angry. How many leftists does it take to screw in a light bulb? That's not funny! Like, God bless. Who would want to be around these people? You know, Jerry Seinfeld doesn't tell comedy anymore because any joke that's funny is canceled. You know, SNL is unwatchable. The late night comedy, they stand up and say, we hate Donald Trump. Yeah, no kidding. We didn't get that the last 9,000 times you told that. You know, in 2020, the New York Times reported that 60% of women named Karen voted for Joe Biden. That's actually real. You can look it up, the fact checkers. That's what the New York Times reported. And I'm willing to bet 80% of the men named Karen voted for Joe Biden. Just have fun. You know, yesterday, John Boehner made some news. He suggested that I do something that was anatomically impossible. To which my response was, who's John Boehner? And you know what? There are a whole lot of voices in Washington that want to just erase the last 4 years. Want to go back to the world before, where we had government of the lobbyists, by the lobbyists, and for the lobbyists. Where the Republicans' compelling message was, Republicans, we waste less. And they look at Donald J. Trump, and they look at the millions and millions of people inspired who went to battle fighting alongside President Trump, and they're terrified. And they want him to go away. Let me tell you this right now, Donald J. Trump ain't going anywhere. And the Republican Party is not the party just of the country clubs. The Republican Party is the party of steel workers and construction workers and pipeline workers and taxi cab drivers and cops and firefighters and waiters and waitresses and the men and women with calluses on their hands who are working for this country. That is our party, and these deplorables are here to stay. Every one of you has a platform. Every one of you has a voice. The corporate media wants to silence these voices. You have a platform. You know, last year I launched a podcast, Verdict with Ted Cruz. Over 25 million downloads in a year. By the way, please go subscribe. Verdict with Ted Cruz, Verdict with Ted Cruz. Click on subscribe. 5 stars, please. But you know what? You have the same platform. You have social media. You have your friends, your neighbors, your family, your classmates. Speak out for freedom. Because I'm going to close with these words of encouragement. These are dark days, and the media tells us this is the new galactic empire forever and 1,000 years. But already Joe Biden and the radicals in his administration, they are already overshooting. They are already going too far. Their policies don't work. They are disasters. They are bad. They are destroying jobs. They are stripping our freedom. And there is a natural pendulum to politics. And the country will come back to sanity. And mark my words, 2022 is going to be a fantastic election year. And so is 2024. As we stand together and defend liberty, defend the Constitution, defend the Bill of Rights of every American. In the immortal words of William Wallace, freedom!
Don't you agree we need voter ID and clean election rolls? Well, your Judicial Watch is in federal court right now fighting to make sure your elections will be fair and honest. Politicians don't want you to know what they're up to. Secret slush funds, secret emails, and pay to play. Judicial Watch is your watchdog in Washington, D.C., shining the light of transparency on our nation's capital.
Want to catch the latest news on government corruption, waste, fraud, and abuse?
Remember there was an impeachment? Do you remember that?
Then check out Judicial Watch's weekly update with Tom Fitton.
We're fighting Adam Schiff to try to get records about his misconduct.
Subscribe now to Judicial Watch on social media to catch Tom Fitton's weekly update.
Forgotten Hillary Clinton. Judicial Watch exposed the Clinton email scandal, and we're in court right now holding her accountable to the same laws and rules the rest of us are expected to follow.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Protecting Elections Part 1. Voting is democracy, why we must protect elections, with remarks by Fox News contributor DeRoy Murdoch.
Good morning, CPAC Nation. Democrat John F. Kennedy liked to joke during the 1960 presidential campaign that he just opened a telegram from his father. It read, "Dear Jack, don't buy one more vote than necessary. I'll be damned if I pay for a landslide." Republican Bob Dole said in 1996, "When I die, I want to be buried in Chicago so I can stay active in politics." These lines get a chuckle or two these days, but especially after the November 2020 election fiasco, vote fraud is no laughing matter. CPAC's theme is America Uncanceled. A keystone of the right's new agenda absolutely, positively must be to uncancel election integrity. Why are clean elections vital? Why must Republicans and Democrats both be able to say after Election Day, yep, that was a fair vote? Election integrity is a core principle that undergirds this constitutional republic that you and I love so much. In 1787, James Madison emphasized the importance of elections in Federalist Paper number 52. And as he wrote, "It is essential to liberty that the government in general should have an immediate dependence on and an intimate sympathy with the people. Frequent elections are unquestionably the only policy by which this dependence and sympathy can be effectually secured." Our republic relies on democratic elections to implement a basic tenet on which this nation stands. Thomas Jefferson wrote this in America's birth certificate, our Declaration of Independence. To secure the rights endowed by our Creator, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Through elections, we give our representatives our consent to be governed. Absent this consent, our founding fathers believed, government is illegitimate. Furthermore, since all men are created equal, our elections should empower one man with one vote. These words were taken quite literally for 144 years. Eventually, in 1920, we embraced the concept of one woman, one vote. And with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, we finally abolished the idea that one had to be white to vote. This proves for all the Cancelistas and Wokistanis out there that America is not perfect, and we have made mistakes along the way, some of them huge, but we always try to do better. And sooner or later, either we get it right, or at least we do it better than damn near any place else on this planet. So in short, election integrity matters. Battle elections are essential to the good health of this republic as checks and balances, the rule of law, and liberty and justice for all. Alas, this guiding concept is in huge trouble these days. Despite the left's relentless lies, vote fraud is a problem. For concrete proof, check the Heritage Foundation's priceless vote fraud database. Heritage Foundation has detailed so far 1,130 criminal convictions for vote fraud. No, not accusations, not indictments, but criminal convictions, 1,130 of them. So don't tell me that vote fraud is just some right-wing hallucination. The November 2020 election was a nightmare. Judges and other officials made last-minute rule changes that only state legislators were authorized to enact, as the U.S. Constitution requires. Mysterious late-night ballot dumps triggered huge lopsided vote spikes for Joe Biden. Multiple affidavits offered sworn eyewitness reports of cars with out-of-state license plates unloading piles of ballots at counting centers in the wee small hours.
Such shenanigans and many more infected Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. No wonder a November 18 Reuters survey found that 39% of Americans believe, quote, the election was rigged, unquote. This included 67% of Republicans, 31% of independents, and even 17% of Democrats. Willfully blind leftists ridicule the right's complaints about fake ballots and election irregularities because they were not widespread. Well, how widespread must vote fraud be before the left shares our concerns? Will that require 10,000 bogus ballots? 1 million phony votes? Here's a modest proposal. The left can pick that widespread number. We on the right will accept it. And in turn, the right will decide which leftists will have their genuine votes canceled by those widespread fraudulent ballots. Let's start with Rachel Maddow, Chuck Todd, Joy Reid, Chris Cuomo, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer. If illegal ballots nullify their votes, maybe they finally will fight for election integrity. Of course, that is unlikely because the Democrat Party is the party of vote fraud. Yes, this is quite a charge, but abundant evidence confirms this allegation. Democrats resist virtually every Republican idea to make our elections more secure, and they labor tirelessly to make our elections more chaotic, more unsupervised, and more unreliable. Democrats, not Republicans, blasted out mass mail-in ballots to everyone on voter rolls in multiple states, whether requested or not. Phantom ballots littered apartment building lobbies. Some were thrown in the trash. How many of them were filled out and submitted? Who knows? Democrats, not Republicans, installed ballot drop boxes on sidewalks where nobody oversaw them. How many fraudulent ballots got deposited in these boxes unchecked and then got counted? Who knows? Democrats, not Republicans, diluted signature match standards, which made it easier to accept and tabulate mail-in ballots with forged signatures. Democrats, not Republicans, blocked GOP observers from ballot counting rooms in Atlanta, Detroit, Philadelphia, and other Democrat swing state cities. In contrast, Democrat observers did their jobs in peace in Republican-controlled areas. Virginia lawmakers passed a sensible bill in 2017 that would have required an investigation of any election in which there were more ballots cast than eligible voters to cast them. Well, guess what? Former Governor Terry McAuliffe, a Democrat, not a Republican, vetoed that measure. The Federal Motor Voter Act and Help America Vote Act both require that states maintain accurate voter rolls. Here in Florida, former Governor Rick Scott attempted to remove 51,000 dead people from the voter rolls. Not so fast. Obama's Attorney General Eric Holder, a Democrat, not a Republican, sued Florida. Holder claimed that the governor's act of electoral hygiene violated the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And now Democrats, not Republicans, are pushing H.R. 1, a bill that would take everything that went haywire last November and shove it into the U.S. Code. As Nancy Reagan might have said, just say no to H.R. 1. We will underscore election integrity's crucial importance via multiple panels throughout CPAC, starting with our very next session. Please join us for these urgent discussions. Speaking of conservative political action, long before the 2022 midterm elections, conservatives should demand at a minimum the following reforms. First, as Ronald Reagan might have said, we must catapult mass mail-in ballots onto the ash heap of history. Second, absentee ballots must be limited to the old, the sick, the infirm, and what a concept, people who will be absent on Election Day. Third, Election Day must be Election Day, not election month or election quarter. Fourth, no more ballot harvesting. Fifth, voters must be American citizens, not foreign citizens. Sixth, voter rolls must be cleaned early and often to remove inactive, relocated, and deceased voters. Let's remember and honor our dead, but let's keep them away from the polls, shall we? Seventh, when voters cast ballots, they must show photo ID that proves they are who they say they are. Now, the left calls us racist for expecting black voters like everyone else to show ID cards. Wrong. What is racist is the Democrats' insistence that we blacks are too disorganized, too confused, or too stupid to get our hands on photo ID cards. What bigoted anti-black filth. Black Americans show photo ID 7 days a week to drive cars, cash checks, purchase adult beverages, and much more. Just yesterday, the federal government under Joe Biden made me show photo ID to board my jet to Orlando, just like everyone else. How racist. Now, if voter ID really is a tool of white nationalism, how does the left explain this? Nigeria, a country that is controlled by black people. If you want to vote, you got to show voter ID. Ghana, a country that is controlled by black people. If you want to vote, you got to show voter ID. And here is the situation in South Africa. Here is the late, great Nelson Mandela wearing a t-shirt that says, "Get an ID, register, vote." So yes, we want voter ID cards, and we want them now. Voter ID cards are good enough for Nelson Mandela, so they're good enough for the USA. The fight for clean elections will be huge in the months and years ahead, and we all need to fight like hell for election integrity. This is a fight we can and must win. If we lose, we will become the corruptly outvoted vassals of the left. It is in our hands, my fellow conservatives, to make elections great again. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Protecting Elections Part 2, Other Culprits, Why Judges and the Media Refuse to Look at the Evidence. Please welcome, from the Banal Law Group, Jesse Banal, Fox News contributor, DeRoy Murdoch, from the Heritage Foundation, Hans von Spakovsky, and our moderator from the American Conservative Union Foundation, Denise Cohn.
We over here? There we go.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
And DeRoy, thank you so much for setting us up.
Pleasure.
DeRoy is a fellow New Yorker. Like me, we both escaped for a couple of days. Jesse Banal is a litigator out of Alexandria, Virginia, and he went to Nevada for 5 days to fight for President Trump and came back 2 months later. Had some interesting experiences. And Hans von Spakovsky with the Heritage Foundation has been writing for them on election integrity for many, many years, and he has always been proven right. So, Roy set it up for us perfectly. If we had actually followed those principles, we wouldn't be sitting here today talking about an election that none of us can wrap our heads around. And we're going to talk about the how, but before we do, let's find out what happened. Why didn't the judges, why didn't the media, why didn't they look at all this evidence that was collecting everywhere? What do you, louder? It's a good crowd, okay.
They want to hear what we have to say.
All right, or turn the mic up. So what do you think, guys? Hans, what do you think? Why do you think the judges didn't look at the evidence?
Well, it's very interesting because, judges in even ordinary election contests are very reluctant to overturn an election. And when it becomes an extraordinary election contest, one with national implications and one in which they risk being attacked by one of the political parties, the pundits, and the news media, their reluctance to do anything gets even greater. And that's why if you look at almost all the cases that were filed after the November election, virtually all of them were dismissed on procedural grounds.
So we're going to get into that, but I mean, are you saying that the judges were afraid that they didn't want to look at the evidence?
Well, I think in some cases that is true. In other cases, they might have had valid procedural grounds, but it sure didn't look like it to me. I mean, the best example of that is one Pennsylvania case was dismissed for the doctrine of latches, which is this legal doctrine that says, well, you can't wait to assert a claim. You can't sit on your rights. Well, the election had just happened, and they filed suit very quickly after that, so applying that doctrine just did not seem legally correct.
Yeah, that was... Why do you think the judges didn't look at it?
Well, Hans von Spakovsky is always right. He's right again today. I think the judges didn't want to get involved. I think essentially they didn't do their jobs. And I think it's a bit like, imagine you're watching Game 7 of the World Series. It's the bottom of the ninth. Teams are tied. Bases are loaded. And the runner on third base tries to steal home, dives into home base. He reaches home base at the same time that the catcher catches him with his mitt. Everybody's wondering, is he safe? Is he out? Everyone looks at the home plate umpire and goes, why are you looking at me? I don't want to get involved. He turns around and walks out the door, all right? So what happens? Rather than either make a good call or bad call, but at least make a call, he doesn't make a call. And what happens? The fans in the stands start fighting with each other, and chaos ensues. The Supreme Court did this when they did not get involved in the Texas case. They should have heard the case. They should have heard the evidence. I think even if they'd heard the evidence, even if they made a decision with which we disagree, we all would be able to say, well, at least we had our day in court. They said, whatever, we don't want to get involved. No, they should have got involved. That's their jobs. Their job is to get involved in the tough cases, not the easy cases, the tough cases, and give us a ruling, and they didn't. And it's to their profound, my view, profound discredit that they didn't do so, and largely, I think, bear a lot of the responsibility for the chaos that ensued.
And that's continuing, right? That's continuing because just last week the Supreme Court... It's continuing because just last week the Supreme Court said they weren't going to look at a whole bunch of other cases.
And again, they're
so
not...
it's going to remain unresolved.
Yeah, what's the excuse now? They don't want to get involved, so next election we're going to deal with this again. They need to get in.
Well,
I hope they make decisions we like, but even if they don't make decisions we dislike, at least we'll know what the rules are. We can proceed rather than just operate in a fog.
Jesse, you had some thoughts about the judges and
I do. I think both of those are excellent points why this happened, but there's another aspect of it too, and that is that actually judges, technically speaking, are human beings. And I understand that they were also lawyers at one point in their career, but when they're serving as judges, they're also human beings. And when you have judges that are doing these, taking on these cases, they're also going home and they're watching the media. So when the media has this narrative that there is no voter fraud, that it's debunked, it's baseless, and they say the same thing over and over and over again in one of the most enraging but successful gaslighting attempts in American history, judges are actually at home watching that. And they don't want to be the first one to go out there and say that the emperor has no clothes. Right. And so you get in this circle of disinformation where the media starts the lie. You know, our friends right there in the media, a lot of them, they start the lie that there's no voter fraud, and they start saying baseless without any basis for saying that it's baseless. Exactly. And then judges go ahead and base their decisions on that, and then the media comes back and points to the judges who are really already doing what the media tells them to do in a lot of cases, saying, see, judges are agreeing with them. So it's a circle of disinformation.
Yeah, and so they're creating a story, but they're not actually investigating either, right? But the media is not actually investigating the situation either.
It's incredible. They have completely abdicated their roles to be the fourth estate and to go out there and try to, be gumshoes and get to the bottom of this by saying, actually, let's look at this evidence. Let's look at this, the huge amount of data that we had in Nevada, for instance, to actually see whether or not it's accurate. They never dug into any of that. They, right or wrong, they never tried to dig into the facts about voter fraud. They just said it doesn't exist.
Right.
And I can give an example of this to show how things have changed in the media. Look, we're in Florida, right? We're in Orlando, okay? Well, in 1997, there was a mayor's race in Miami, okay? There were all these stories and claims that fraud may have occurred in that election. So the Miami Herald actually assigned a huge group of reporters to investigate the case. They went out, they interviewed witnesses, they interviewed voters, and they uncovered a voter fraud conspiracy that ended up in court. A judge overturned the election, said there were probably at least 5,000 fraudulent ballots cast in that election. Dozens of individuals were indicted, criminally charged, and convicted, and the Miami Herald won a Pulitzer Prize for its work. Okay? You didn't see that same kind of activity after this last election, and in fact, last fall, before the election, USA Today, PBS Frontline, assigned more than a dozen reporters to investigate me and the election fraud database that we maintain at the Heritage Foundation, which has over 1,300 proven cases of fraud. And what were the reporters doing? Going through our database, case by case by case, trying to find a mistake, rather than actually going out and investigating the kind of claims Jesse is talking about, where you go interview the witnesses and see what their credibility is and what their stories are.
Right.
No, I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, one of my huge frustrations as a Fox News contributor and someone who's on TV and on radio is hearing these, my brethren in the media say, oh, there's no evidence of vote fraud. It got to the point where I would go on television, and I wrote about a dozen articles about vote fraud in addition to the TV and radio appearances I did. And I put one article in a file and another, until I had probably a stack about that big, 4 folders, 4 files like this. And I go on there and say, oh, no evidence? Well, then, please explain all this stuff. Affidavits, courtroom transcripts, courtroom pleadings by Jesse, as a matter of fact, statistical anomalies, letters from legislators and so on. There was evidence. Now, you can weigh some evidence more than others or question some evidence, but the idea that there is no evidence was a total, complete lie, but they repeated it over and over and over again until people believed, oh, there's no evidence, it's just all of us hallucinating up here.
Well, and in fact, it seems that there was only one case out of all of this litigation that we've seen where there may have been a tiny little bit of evidence that did go forward, and that was in Nevada, and it wasn't covered that much, perhaps because there was some evidence. But you were saying that your procedural rights were kind of interfered with just in the way that the case was conducted. You weren't given, the opportunities that you normally would.
That's absolutely right. Our legs were cut off before we even walked into the courthouse. We were told that we had to prove our entire case for election fraud with no more than 15 witnesses, that we would have to put all this together during the Thanksgiving holiday, and so if we couldn't get witnesses to show up, then we wouldn't be able to substitute in one witness for another. It would all be by deposition, no live testimony, and we were given no meaningful opportunity to actually go out there and prove our case. We had 30 witnesses that were ready to go, and half of our witnesses were taken away from us at the very first status conference in the case. When it came to our appeal, the Supreme Court of Nevada gave us slightly over 2 hours to file our appellate brief. 2 hours. Normally, that's something that you get at least months for. An election case is going to be truncated, we understand that, but they gave us slightly over 2 hours. In slightly over 2 hours, we still, with a great team, still put together a 40-page brief of all the problems in the district court.
So Jesse, in 2 hours, you were able to pull together a 40-page brief explaining everything. And I imagine it must have taken them quite some time to review the brief and come back to you with an opinion?
About 2 hours later, they came out with their opinion. I'm sure there was no chance that was written before we even filed our brief.
No chance at all.
Matter of fact, we know it is because one of the things they told us in the 2 hours is they wanted us to quote chapter and verse where in the district court record our errors were, because they figured there's no way in a couple hours that we could get that in there. But we did. And they had a part of their opinion that said that we didn't do it because they assumed that we wouldn't be able to do it.
Wow.
And now, that was the only case where there was any kind of evidence. So we go back to all of the rest, all of the hundreds of cases that didn't go forward, and they were dismissed on what are procedural grounds? Who?
Standing? I guess standing was a big, you don't have
So
standing.
what is standing? What is standing?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. Maybe one of the attorneys.
Is he the best person to answer
Well,
it then?
I mean, with standing, you have to show that you have a concrete injury. You're not just speculating that you might have been injured or perhaps you'll be injured, and many of the cases were dismissed on that ground. Look, the key point here is the credibility of all of these claims was never really investigated. And that's something that you should do and have to do. And since the courts didn't do it, frankly, it's now up to the state legislatures to do this. They are in session all over the country, and they should be doing it.
And if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Georgia has a GOP state legislature. I believe Pennsylvania does as well. I think not both houses in various states, but one house or the other. So you could have, as you say, state legislative investigations, hearings, where they finally can get to the evidence, get this stuff out there. Obviously, it's too late to do anything about the 2020 election, but at least we can know what happened and act accordingly.
Right. It really is quite remarkable because there are how much evidence do you think there is that's accumulating in boxes around the country? All of these public records.
Well, maybe,
how much
maybe
do you think
it may be shredded by now.
Yeah.
You think so?
Maybe. Well, probably.
Well, look, they're supposed to keep them.
Because what?
They don't always keep them. They're supposed to keep them, but it's unfortunately far too common for a lot of these local officials to maybe not keep up with their document retention requirements because in many cases they know about the voter fraud, but they're unfortunately looking out for their own necks, and they're perhaps not that concerned about the voter fraud because they know that the voter fraud is going their direction. And so they have no real incentive to keep up with their document retention policies. But we do need to do that, and it's absolutely critical that state legislatures start doing their jobs like they've said. But the other thing that we need to start doing is what the Democrats have been doing for a very long time, and that is understanding that these cases aren't won in the days, weeks after an election. They're won in the weeks, months, and even years before elections. So when we litigate these cases now, we need to try to get ahead of it. We can't just be playing defense. We need to go on the offense. We need to go in there and say, we have constitutional rights at issues to make sure that there's not voter disenfranchisement through fraud. Because every single time that a fraudulent vote is counted, the vote of an honest citizen is dead. It's canceled out. And the media is ignoring that message. They say what we're doing is voter suppression. When they're suppressing the real speech on this issue, that's the real suppression, and that's the real voter disenfranchisement that's happening.
Well, ironically, Ironically, they ignore the voter suppression. And in fact, my brother was watching CNN this morning. And they were talking about this panel, about DeRoy's panel, about all the stuff that we're doing on election integrity. And they said it was just a bunch of voter suppression.
But see, it's the opposite then. Let me give you a quick example again, okay? Shortly before the election, I actually published a paper at the Heritage Foundation. There was a study of 4 proven absentee ballot fraud cases from across the country, including that Miami mayor's race that I talked about, and in which elections were overturned because of the fraud. And let me tell you what the common factor was in almost all of those cases. The people engaging in the fraud, stealing the election, submitting fraudulent ballots, who do you think they picked on? What they picked on was the most vulnerable populations. They were going after, as they said in the Indiana case, the elderly, people for whom English is not the first language, folks who are voting for the first time. They were going after the poor and the people who wouldn't know that what's going on is wrong, who wouldn't complain about it. So those are the populations who are picked on by the folks who want to steal elections.
Yeah, Hans is right about that, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's a case not too long ago where some folks actually were caught trying to get homeless people to vote, and the way they were doing it was giving them cigarettes.
Yes.
Is that right? I mean, this is from people who probably say, oh, big tobacco's awful. Here they are giving cigarettes to homeless people so they can put them on buses and take them to go vote. This is ugly, disgusting behavior. And by the way, I think one thing that would help a lot, has not come up yet, but I go through very often I've gone through the excellent database that Hans and his team have put together at the Heritage Foundation. And you can read the specifics on these cases, the location, the dates, the circumstances, and the punishments. And almost always what you see is probation, suspended sentence, small fine, oh, don't do that again. This is going to keep going unless we start putting people in jail, locking them up behind bars, and when people see...
You know what, Troy, I'm going
to... When fraudulent political actors find themselves behind bars, not for a week or two, but I'm talking months and years, then maybe this will start tapering off. Right now, there's no disincentive to do it. Why not steal an election? You know, maybe you'll have to, do a little community service or something.
This is an issue.
Probably won't be caught.
Is it stolen, or was it that the laws were weakened so much leading into the election that there was plenty of room for error, and it's very hard to distinguish between when people are innocently making mistakes and their votes, which should not be counted, are being counted. And that's the kind of thing that we would have discovered had we actually taken a look at the evidence. It's not necessarily the most nefarious thing that people are looking at. It could be just human error that was sufficient enough. Maybe. But we haven't looked at the evidence, so this is the point. We don't know, and that's the major frustration here.
That's an excellent point. It is an excellent point. There is some mistakes that were truly human error. There were irregularities that were human error. There's, perhaps people that didn't know that they couldn't vote once they've moved to a new state. I don't know. There's certain instances of that. But in Nevada, we introduced evidence of 42,000 double votes or multiple votes. That's not an accident. Most people know that in this country we have one person and one vote. And the failure to even look at that evidence and also look at the irregularities and the fact that we have these laws and these, in Nevada there was a law called AB4 that was passed in the dead of night just months before the election, for instance, that set the groundwork for voter fraud, that set the groundwork for irregularities, that set it for all of this, and lo and behold, the stage was set and the fraud and the irregularities came.
Now, you testified to this in the U.S. Senate, didn't you?
I did.
Did everybody see it on YouTube?
I'm sorry?
Did everybody see it on YouTube?
YouTube took down my sworn Senate testimony before the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs because it talked about voter fraud. They took it down. That is one of the incredible examples of the suppression of speech that we've gotten right now, and where you have not just the traditional media, but you have these social media outlets that are trying to absolutely silence this discussion and this debate that we're having. The traditional media is no better. USA Today tried to fact-check our case in Nevada. And the way they did it is they went and got a data scientist, because we had extremely compelling data that still has never been rebutted, only ignored. And USA Today got this data scientist to say, oh, they didn't, the data evidence didn't show which reports and data it was looking at. That's just absolutely wrong. It was in the expert report, and our expert was deposed in cross-examination by one of the main partners at Perkins Coie. It is hogwash to say that we didn't give him that information. And the next thing that USA Today, the fact checker, did was read the court's opinion and say, well, the court disagreed with this, so it must be false. Again, we get back into this circle of disinformation.
You mentioned mistakes. There are mistakes. People sometimes do something innocently, which they shouldn't do. But we have affidavits. Affidavits are evidence. This is among the evidence that the media refused to read were all these affidavits. Well, I think about 1,000 by people who saw things that they thought were funny, unusual, illegal, as the case may be. I was fascinated by some affidavits out of Georgia by election observers, including a couple of Democrats who said that they saw these ballots for Biden, absentee ballots. Absentee ballots leave the registrar of voters. They fold them, they put them in envelopes, you fill them out, you fold them again, you mail them back. So they have fold marks. Well, these absentee ballots, according to these affidavits, did not have fold marks. They were never folded. And they had votes for Biden and nothing else, nobody voting for House or Congress or City Council, what have you. And the bubbles where you fill in Biden were all pristine, all completely, perfectly filled in and identical, as if done by a machine or something like that. That to me is unusual. That to me sounds pretty illegal. And I think at a minimum, we should have had an investigation of that and seen, was this on the up and up or was this corrupt?
Why did that evidence not go forward? What happened there? How did that get thrown out?
It didn't go forward. I think you guys can correct me on this, but I believe the judges who saw it in Georgia said, oh, well, we're not going to rule on this, and the case was dismissed.
And I'll give you another example in our case on that, is we were able to get in the discovery period, the 4-day discovery period we had in Nevada, evidence of over 4,000 undocumented immigrants voting in Nevada.
Discovery where you get the other people to turn over the information that you're looking for so that you can...
That's right. And because we didn't turn it over before we had it, the judge wouldn't accept it. The judge wouldn't accept our affidavit evidence after limiting us to 15 witnesses. We tried to get in other witnesses through affidavits because that's all we could do, and the judge wouldn't accept that at all either.
What this demonstrates is, look, it is really difficult to prove fraud after an election because you have only a short period of time. It's hard and difficult to gather the evidence, takes a lot of time and resources. And what all of this illustrates is you want to be sure that it doesn't happen in the first place.
Yes.
And the only way that's going to happen, is two things that have to be done right now. Okay, one of them is stopping, as DeRoy was talking about, H.R. 1, which is coming down the pike this week. Okay, which will basically put in the worst rules you can imagine in all the states and will ban states from having basic security protocols like voter ID laws. But the second thing is getting the state legislatures right now while they're in session to fix all of these problems and all of these issues and doing just basic common sense things like putting in voter ID laws that apply to both in-person and absentee balloting.
One of the things that's difficult about H.R. 1 that's coming to the floor of the House next week, and it's designed to federalize all election law, which is really designed to be run by the state legislatures. Has to be run by the states, agreed, per the Constitution. So.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The Constitution says that the election laws are supposed to be governed by the states. H.R. 1 says,
so H.R. 1 is an
Constitution, whatever, we're going to do our own thing, which is sort of their outlook on a lot of things.
Here's the reason that this is so difficult to swallow is this election actually was lost very closely. The Washington Post reported that fewer than 45,000 votes would have swung it in a different direction across 3 different states. 3 different states, 42,000 votes, 45,000 votes, something like that, and we would have had an electoral college vote of 269 to 269. Back then, Republicans had the majority in the House of Representatives. They would have voted, and President Trump would have had a second term, and something like H.R. 1 would not be able to go through. There are going to be many consequences that we're facing because such a close election was lost. And with all of these efforts from the media, from the judges, from the left, all of these efforts still came to a very close race.
Yeah, but that's why these kind of state law provisions can make a difference. And again, if I can just go back to it very quickly, to show what a difference it could make, H.R. 1 bans all state voter ID laws at the very same time that it requires all states to put in same-day voter registration. You understand what that means? That means that I could walk into any polling place on Election Day, say that my name is not Hans von Spakovsky, but Tom Swift, and I live at 100 Main Street. They have to register me and immediately let me vote, and they can't ask me for an ID to verify who I am that actually live in that area. I could then leave that polling place and go to the next polling place down the street, immediately register under the name Tom Smith, vote, and keep doing it all day, and there's absolutely nothing state officials could do to stop it if H.R. 1 is passed.
And, well, we're going to stop. We have to fight. At the end of this session, we'll be forcing out to your apps a means for you to contact your legislator. You'll put in some information, and you'll be able to send them a letter telling them to vote against it. And our goal really is that not a single Republican in the House votes for this thing. We need to have a unified front to fight it. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge, and
yeah, well, it will be a challenge. But look, I mean, we need to fight on this one, and I think this is probably going to go down to a party line vote. I don't know if we can peel away any of the Democrats in the Senate on this, but we all ought to be talking to everyone who know. Contact your lawmakers, contact your friends, call the radio stations, go on local television, whatever access to the media you have, and just scream bloody murder about this thing. Because if this goes through, all the garbage we saw last November is going to be baked into the U.S. code.
Yeah, and look, this actually. There should be a bipartisan effort in the states to stop this, because I don't care whether you're a Republican state legislator or a Democratic state legislator, you ought to be angry at the idea that Washington is going to usurp your role and tell you how to run elections in your state. The residents of that state, through their elected representatives, are the ones who make that decision. H.R. 1, I think, is the most anti-democratic bill I've seen in my 20 years in Washington.
That says a lot.
It does say
and they call it, what, the For the People Act, right?
Right.
We call it the Not For the People Act. It's Orwellian bill names.
So we're going to wrap it up pretty quickly. And just what is one of the most egregious things that you think happened in this last election cycle that caused us to be where we are today?
Absentee ballots. Look, nobody disputes that we need them for people who are in the military and overseas, or for people who are so physically disabled they can't make it to the polling place. But other than that, we should all be voting in person. And the biggest mistake that was made in the last election, in addition to the fact that voter rolls are in notoriously bad shape around the country, is that there was this huge push to go to absentee ballots. COVID-19 was used as an excuse, even though all of us are safely going to our grocery stores and our pharmacies. And the whole problem with absentee ballots is this. They're the only kind of ballot that are voted outside the supervision of election officials and outside the observation of poll watchers. And that makes them the most vulnerable to being altered, changed, forged, and it makes voters vulnerable in their homes to pressure and coercion to vote a particular way. And that is the whole problem with them. And I think that was the biggest problem with this past election.
I'll pick up on something Hans said. Hillary Clinton said one of the reasons that she lost the election in 2016 was that the pro-Trump husbands were forcing their pro-Hillary wives to vote for Trump, okay? And we all laughed at that. And it sounds like yet another of her 1,000 excuses as to why what happened happened. But there probably are instances where you've got a very abusive spouse. It could be the wife beating up the husband, or the husband beating up the wife, as the case may be. Or it could be, okay, Grandpa, if you don't vote the way we want, you're not going to get your insulin this afternoon, or whatever else it is. Now, if you have that kind of pressure, you can go to the polls, vote the way you want, and then come out and tell your obnoxious relatives, hey, I voted the way you wanted, when in fact you didn't. But if you've got an absentee ballot, you're sitting at the kitchen table and they're watching you fill it out, and they're going to pick it up and drop it off at the drop-off box a couple blocks away, you're now voting for a candidate you don't want to support. So this is an additional problem, and why we need to stop these absentee ballots. The other thing I'd add very briefly is there's something beautiful, I think, about the way we used to vote, which is we show up on Election Day, you go to the local firehouse, the local schoolroom, whatever it is. And we, the American people, on one day in November, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, decide who our leaders will be. And there's something very moving and touching. And then they count the ballots, and about midnight or so, we know who's going to govern us, and the people we've given the consent to govern us. Now you sit at home, you're voting in a bathrobe or with a towel around your waist, whatever it is, while you're watching Jimmy Kimmel or whatever's going on, and then you drop it off at some drop box. Who knows if it's ever going to get picked up or if it's blended in with fraudulent ballots. And what they've basically done is dumb down elections. So you've got the fraud problem and just this destruction of this beautiful civic ritual of the American people coming together to have democratic elections, our constitutional republic. I think we need to go back to the old model.
We have to have transparency.
Sorry?
We have to have transparency. That is one of the most important lessons that I think we get out of the 2020 election. That, hey, maybe the Washington Post is onto something, and democracy does die in darkness. Because the kind of darkness we had in 2020 was tons and tons of examples where there was no transparency in the way that votes were being cast and the way that votes were being counted.
Right. And
that observers were shunned, weren't given meaningful access. There were tons of time where election officials were alone with ballots, which is a horrible, horrible idea. Yeah. We had evidence in Nevada where postal workers were told by their supervisors they had to deliver ballots to undeliverable addresses. And then when we tried to subpoena those postal workers, the Postal Service said, nope, they can't come to court. We're not going to let you not even come to court. You can't even take a deposition of them. We have to have transparency. We have to make sure that, like we say, the mail-in voting is just ripe for fraud. The rest of the world almost exclusively does voting in person because of the opportunities for fraud in mail-in voting. And we're supposed to be the gold standard. We have to put a stop in this, and making sure there's transparency in the future. It's one of the most important things we can do.
There are many things that we have to do, and DeRoy had a great list of them. The American Conservative Union is going to be launching a Center to Protect Elections, and we're going to be counting on everybody here to join us to be activists to fight. We'll be talking more about it towards the end of the election, sorry, the end of the conference. But again, please look at your phones and do your part right now to fight H.R. 1 and make sure that we do everything we can to defeat this bill, because it's going to be that much harder for us to ever have another Republican elected if we lose it. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome to Our Freedom Media Group, where freedom is real. Experience all our platforms for yourself now at www.ourfreedommg.com. Tired of restrictive social media platforms? Join Our Freedom Book. Tired of selective video upload and crowdfunding sites? Join Our Freedom Tube or Our Freedom Funding. With features that include live streaming, video calling and messaging, plus a 24/7 friend finder, With Map Geolocation, American-owned and made in the USA, we're a place where your freedom of speech will be honored. Exercise your right on a secure social media platform without bias, censors, or bans, where your ideas can compete on a level field. If you're looking for a site that doesn't fact-check you and send you to fake jail, a site that cancels cancel culture, then our Freedom Media Group is the freedom you've been waiting for. Sign up today at ourfreedommg.com, where freedom is real.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next panel will feature a discussion about Amendment 5, freedom from confiscation of private property. Please welcome our panel. From the American Conservative Union Foundation Board, former Nevada Attorney General Adam Laxalt. From Courage to Stand, Shelley Luther. From Atlas Gym, Ian Smith. Moderated by the Washington Examiner's Carrie Pickett.
Stay standing, stay standing. Good morning, CPAC. This is the Fifth Amendment, Freedom from Confiscation of Property panel. I'm Carrie Pickett. I'm the senior campaign reporter at the Washington Examiner and host at SiriusXM Patriot 125. On this panel, we'll discuss how millions of American small businesses were forced to close due to COVID restrictions that prohibited them from operating. Now, according to our Constitution, when the government seizes your property, the Fifth Amendment guarantees that you must be properly compensated for what was taken. Within our Fifth Amendment, there is a takings clause. This mandates payment of just compensation anytime the government takes private property for public use. Yet, in the wake of the pandemic shutdowns, owners were left financially devastated and forced to fire their employees. About 53% of small business owners don't expect to return to pre-COVID operations for at least the next 6 months, according to a survey taken by the U.S. Census Bureau back in December. On average, across the 50 largest U.S. metro areas, only 26% of small businesses have at least 3 months of cash readily available, which is the minimum amount generally recommended as a safety net. Now, the COVID pandemic set up a convenient crisis, creating ideal conditions for big government to assuage the American public into acceptance of and compliance with some of the most extreme proposals from their decades-old wish list, even if it means chipping away at some of our most sacred constitutional rights. Today's pandemic bureaucrats, though, modeled their own actions after what state and local governments did between 1918 and 1919 when they shut down many businesses during the Spanish influenza epidemic in the United States. Back then, there was the desire to impose regulations in the name of public health. The science guiding them wasn't precise, though, and they didn't have the benefit of the research we have now. They also didn't have the PPP loans and the bailouts or any other part of the massive government response that we see now. Today, legal precedent maintains that only a few government actions can be defined as a quote-unquote taking, and these would generally fall under a permanent physical occupation or of a property or regulations that destroy or damage of a property's financial value. We may have a debate over kilo, but not COVID. So since businesses shut down were supposed to be temporary, it's been an uphill battle for small businesses to win these legal fights against their state governments. But does that make these shutdowns constitutional? That's right. The High Court, though, also maintained that the Fifth Amendment was also designed to prohibit government from forcing only some people to bear public burdens, which in all fairness should be borne by the public as a whole. So why are only certain small businesses forced to shoulder an unfair share of the burden to protect their communities against this deadly disease, while other businesses have continued to run their operations, albeit under certain COVID regulations. How's that fair? Why should small businesses be forced to shutter their doors when their big box counterparts can remain open? And why can only certain businesses in strip malls remain open while other businesses of the same size, but of a different nature, be forced to close? Yet, when we look at the numbers, some of the worst state lockdowns have the highest COVID mortality rates, and vice versa. Why are Florida's COVID numbers relatively similar to California's, but California had some of the most stringent lockdowns? Why is every state so different from California, as in all things, which leads with the worst ideas? So my question is this: why are business owners forced to rely on these federal government spending packages to pass to compensate them when it was their state governments, their governors, who decided to shut them down to begin with? So questions like these and others are often responded to by government officials with the trite response that they're simply following the science. And if these businesses don't adhere to these regulations, they'll have the heavy financial penalties and they'll also have jail time. And that brings me to meet our panelists right here. Dallas, Texas hair salon owner Shelley Luther became well known last year when she reopened her salon 4 weeks after the state issued a shutdown order for business establishments just like hers. She was sentenced to 1 week of jail time and issued a $7,000 fine by a Dallas judge who told her she had the option to avoid jail if she admitted to the government she was, quote, wrong and selfish for reopening too soon. To her immense credit and the admiration of patriots everywhere, she stood fast and refused to acquiesce to this dictatorial fiat. She chose instead to face imprisonment. Ultimately, she was released after 2 days when Governor Abbott removed the threat of jail from the order she'd violated. Another defiant business owner we have here on the panel is Ian Smith, co-owner of Attilis Gym in Belmar, New Jersey. Ian and his co-owner, Frank Trombetti, famously refused to follow New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy's shutdown orders of non-essential businesses since last March. Despite Murphy's continued attempts to close down they repeatedly reopened their gym. Remember them kicking down the doors, filed a lawsuit against the state, and they were arrested and had their license rescinded by the borough of Belmar. Ian and Frank have raised over $468,000 and counting in their legal defense funds for their efforts. Congratulations, Ian. And finally, we have former Nevada Attorney General and ACU Foundation board member Adam Laxalt. Laxalt has served as Nevada's Attorney General between 2015 and 2019. Prior to his time as Nevada's Attorney General, he worked at the State Department under John Bolton during the George W. Bush administration, and he later served as the U.S. Navy's, he also served in the U.S. Navy's JAG Corps. Let's hear what our panelists have to say right now. Mr. Attorney General. I'd like for you to really take some of these questions that I put out there and really wonder, how exactly do you think government should take advantage, how do you think that government has taken advantage of the pandemic ultimately and really crushed these businesses? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's important that we go back to the beginning of this. Our founding principles, both the U.S. Constitution and state constitutions, we enshrined individual liberties for a reason. They knew that government, in general, was always wanting to encroach upon our liberties. This is something we've seen forever. But I think they particularly knew that in times of emergency, that emergencies would be used to take as much power as possible. And so, as been said many times, our individual liberties are not fair weather rights. And sure, it's easy for us to preserve our individual rights when there's not times of crisis, although clearly many of our rights are generally in jeopardy. But government is going to use this kind of a crisis to go as far and fast as possible. And so I think what's most disturbing is the original mindset. And if you're a governor of a state and you're trying to protect the public from a public health crisis, you should have right here at your core that these are my people, these are my citizens, and I want to do the best I can to preserve as many of their liberties as possible. That should have been the starting point. And we all would have agreed from the very beginning that there were measures that need to be taken by government to try to alleviate the pandemic. But rather than do what, say, Governor Ron DeSantis did, when he was faced with the call to close churches, what was his response? His response is, freedom of worship, this is a fundamental right. Who am I to say that someone can't make that personal decision to go to church and receive the bread that they need? And so he refused to just willy-nilly close churches. And if all governors took that approach, where small businesses, did we need to shut down hair salons for 7 months? Or should we have said to all the hair salon people, can you open safely? Just give us a plan. You want to keep your people as safe as we do, and so do what you can, keep people safe, we'll strike that proper balance. And the problem is they took the convenient way. Broad, totally discriminate shutdowns. And yes, big box stores and grocery stores stayed open the entire time. Small businesses done, churches done. In our state, schools,